Broadcasting live from Washington, D.C., this is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Talking Left. Proud to be your alternative to the Sunday morning corporate news.
News? We put in quotation marks.
Yes, in big quotation marks.
Gigantic, huge. David Gregory size.
Yes, David Gregory size.
He's a big man, by the way.
Hope everybody out there is having a great morning. Happy Sunday. We
took a week off, and look what happened.
Yes. Lots of news exploded.
So we will now be on the air for the next 12 hours.
If I have enough show prep.
I know you do.
To do a show for 12 hours.
But we have something much better after 3 hours of us.
Yes. Jacob Dean.
Yay.
Yes. Filter Free Radio's debut on We Act Radio will be today at noon. So be sure to tune in after Talking Left. Just stick around. Oh, I hit my box twice. Yes. New toys in the studio, too.
Yay.
Big show in store for you guys today. Heidi Weber, whistleblower, a for-profit college, Globe University. Dave Saldana, the producer and director of Keystone Pipelines Exposed. And our friend and teacher, Mr. Kopolakis, on the history of minimum wage.
It's really interesting.
It is, and
stuff you did not know.
No, and we didn't have enough time to get to all the stuff we wanted to talk to with him. So
I think he's going to be a regular.
He's going to be back.
Smart guy.
Yes, he knows a thing or two about a thing or two.
Yeah, we love the weeds.
Yes,
and you know what? Weeds is we like the backstory, the real people who say, "Oh, history is repeating itself." There's another phrase. History only repeats itself to people who don't know the details. And those details, those things are always far more complicated in the moment than when we remember them 50, 60, 70, 80 years later.
Yes.
So knowing all those things can arm us with a lot more information and how to move forward. Okay.
Bazinga.
I'm just going to leave that figure up for the whole show.
Probably a good idea.
Okay.
At least until I get it out of my system.
Okay.
Okay. As usual, we like to start off with the news that you may have missed or that we think needs a little bit more attention.
This is a solemn show this morning.
Yes. Solemn show?
Solemn. We're laughing too much.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
News that we don't particularly care about to start off, just to get it out of the way, to say we talked about it.
What are you talking about?
Paul Ryan introduced his budget.
Oh, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Guess what? It's the same old garbage.
It is. And remember I said we should cover this by covering the progressive budget again?
Exactly.
Because the progressive budget actually lines up with what people think, feel, and want in this.
Better off budget.
Yes.
Yes. So, yes, we talked about it. Cut social services.
Yep.
Fund the military.
Yep.
And privatize, block grant, privatize. There.
Lower flattened tax.
That's Ryan's budget.
Yeah.
That's about as much as we care about it.
Yeah.
Because it's worth that much.
It's the same nonsense.
Exactly.
Trillions. And by the way, I think he repeals the Affordable Care Act and keeps the Medicare.
Oh, he just doesn't really talk about it.
Yeah.
He just leaves that little detail out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oops. He forgot that in his number crunching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That card's up his sleeve.
Exactly. And in some good news that did not get enough attention this week, and I really wanted to point it out because we are all about education, public education, and we are all about getting active and getting involved. Not one, but two huge protests in support of public education this week.
Really?
Yes.
Didn't hear about that anywhere.
Exactly.
Except here.
In Oklahoma, 25,000 teachers showed up, converged on the Capitol to demand that the government stop cutting public education budgets. 25,000 teachers.
That's a lot of teachers.
You'd think maybe they could have gotten a news camera or two there.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I wonder if the local AV, the kids from the AV department at the schools.
Yeah.
I mean, there must be video out there.
There's got to be.
Yeah.
But, I mean, come on. You got to give a shout out to 25,000 teachers. And it's not like Oklahoma has, beautiful spring weather right now. Mm. These people stood, protested out in the cold. And I love this quote from one of the teachers. You know, we hear this talking point all the time that it's all about the unions and teachers just want more money, blah, blah, blah. One of these teachers said, sure, I would love another couple bucks in my pocket, but my students would really like technology in the classroom, adequate supplies, textbooks, and all of that. This isn't about money.
No.
This is about they want to be able to do their jobs and provide a great public education.
Right.
Yes, in addition to that, students at the University of Southern Maine and teachers and administrators occupied the president's office of their university. Just like we've seen all around the country, the University of Southern Maine announced layoffs and cutbacks in student services. So 100 students and faculty staged a sit-in at the law building, which is where the provost's office is, and lined the hallways supporting the teachers that were forced to walk through that crowd to get their layoff letters. Yeah. These students and teachers just want, in their words, to stand up against the national corporate war on public education. Of course, just like everywhere else around the country, the University of Southern Maine says it's all about budget cuts and reduced funding for education. However, in the meantime, their revenue's gone up, their executive salaries have gone up. Everything, they've got money to pay the bigwigs, but not money to keep the teachers and to keep all of the student services. So I just wanted to give a shout out. Oh, yeah, and by the way, Occupy.
Yeah.
Rebirth of Occupy this week. Yeah. I don't think it went anywhere, but
of course it goes everywhere.
I mean, it didn't disappear.
Oh no! You're saying it. You're saying it didn't leave,
right? So
therefore, it coming back it's just a continuation.
Exactly, but people showed up again at Zuccotti Park, around the country at several different events.
Starting April 4th through July 4th.
Yes. So right on.
Speaking of protests at college, did you hear about this thing at College of Charleston?
No, there's another one.
Well, this is a different kind of protest. This is a protest against students. They've named this guy Lieutenant Governor Glenn McConnell as the new president of the College of Charleston. Oh yeah. Do you know anything about Glenn McConnell?
Isn't he the guy who supports the Confederate flag?
More than that, he's still fighting the war.
Nice guy.
Yeah,
nice guy.
So they're protesting there too.
It's all about heritage, right?
Yeah. Heritage. Mm-hmm.
Talking point. I'm from the South, where lots of people think it's okay to fly the Confederate flag.
Yeah, I remember living down there and seeing more than a few of them.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm sorry, you could say all you want that it's about heritage and Southern pride. What is it exactly that you're proud about?
Yeah.
Because the only time that flag was relevant.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here, folks.
Yeah.
Okay. More. We've got lots of good news this morning.
Cool.
Lots of good news.
It's spring.
It's
actually spring.
Yes.
Looking out the window, it's legitimately spring.
This one's long overdue, and again, not getting any attention. Congress is actually calling on the EPA to investigate water contamination from fracking. Didn't hear about that, did you?
No.
8 Congress members, of course, some who you know and love, like Raul Grijalva and Keith Ellison, along with quite a few others, Cartwright, Lowenthal, Huffman, Pocan, etc. But they have sent a letter to EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy and said that there's these 3 areas the EPA was previously investigating: Dimock, Pennsylvania, Parker County, Texas, and Pavilion, Wyoming.
Yeah.
These communities experienced severe water contamination. Their drinking water is completely polluted because of fracking. Several years ago, the EPA started to investigate and then just up and left. No explanation, never finalized the report, never said.
When you say several years ago, how many? Are we talking 7 or are we talking 3?
I don't have it in this news story, but
it depends on who was the prez.
Right. I think it was.
Although we've got to point out that our current prez is all for fracking.
Right. So all these Congress
safe
people,
fracking though.
All these sure.
Along with clean coal.
All these Congress people are calling on the EPA to just reopen this investigation, to finish what they started. They said that the EPA stopped their investigation and left these people in these communities, quote, with polluted water and little explanation. One of the gentlemen who, Ray Kemble, an affected resident in Dimock, Pennsylvania, said, quote, Europeans aren't fracking their own country's shale gas because they're worried about its environmental and health impacts. They're right to worry. I haven't had clean water for 4 years, and it's due to oil and gas drilling.
Wow.
Yeah. So good on them, these members of Congress. But how about we make this a bigger investigation and not just in these 3 communities?
Well, I think you have to start with the 3 communities, and then you make those 3 communities information incredibly public.
Yeah.
What they find, and then you'll have a lot of people saying, "Wait a minute, there's one of those right down the road from me. I want to know what's going on here." Honestly, it only takes one to blow the roof off of it.
And if there's not one in your community, there could be soon if Congress has their way.
They're coming to you.
Just think about it. You have these eight members of Congress. 8 out of how many trying to get an investigation on this while
535.
Right.
If you wanted to really know the number.
Right. While you have, the entire GOP saying we should frack more so that we can send it to Ukraine, which isn't even feasibly possible. And before that, they said we need to do it for Syria.
Sorry. Ukraine is just a made-up reason to
right.
do it.
Exactly. Some more good news?
Wow.
Yes.
I'm going to smile all day now.
I know. District of Columbia Mayor Vincent Gray has signed a bill decriminalizing marijuana. This is specifically important because...
Now, question.
Yes.
Before you get into this, does Congress have, does Congress have to also weigh in? So,
yes.
And it would be the House of Representatives that would have to do this?
This measure is now facing a 60-day congressional review.
Maybe they'll just let it go. Is it one of those things where if they don't vote on it, it becomes law too?
I don't know.
I'm asking you all kinds of questions, technical questions that I should go look up.
I don't know. Well, maybe
kind of like a pocket veto.
Maybe if I told you what I was actually going to talk about at the beginning of the show, you'd have time to look those up instead of just surprising you.
Yeah, I know. I get topic 1, lots of plug guests and nothing.
Yes.
I'm just going to roll with it. Go for
it. Possession in D.C. used to be a misdemeanor carrying 6 months in jail and a $1,000 fine. However, if this new bill passes Congress, it will essentially be turned into a parking ticket with a $25 written ticket. This is especially important in D.C. because all over, we know about the racial disparity in drug arrests. It's particularly bad
I'm sure.
in D.C. Black people in D.C. are 8 times more likely to be arrested for pot than white people. And I'm sorry, the usage rate is just about the same, if not even more in the other direction.
Right.
This is completely, racial targeting.
Sure.
And so it's really good that this law has been passed. Hopefully Congress signs this and we can get rid of this statistic. It's ridiculous.
When I went to college at Michigan, Ann Arbor, talking about, because I'm an old dude, we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s. Back then, ticket.
It
was just like a parking ticket if you were caught in possession. They used to have this huge, actually, now that I think about it, it may have been yesterday, Hash Bash, on the quad at Ann Arbor. The first Monday of April, I think, or the first Saturday of April. Ann Arbor did marijuana legalization protests for decades. Decades and decades. Now, it's nice to see that it's coming to other parts of the nation, these ticket things.
I think, this is a movement. Congress can try and hold this up. And they might be able to do so in their little petri dish of D.C. But state after state is realizing that this is ridiculous policy.
Yeah, well, and also, and Jacob talks about this a lot, about the parade.
Yeah.
That, we start the parade and then they jump in front. The parade's there. So it's just a matter of who's going to jump in front. It would be wise for the more progressive Democrats to jump in front of this parade.
Well, I have to say, I personally find it very interesting that it's Vincent Gray, mayor of D.C., who signed this law.
Yeah.
Just coincidentally, while there happened to be an election going on.
But you know what? You could call that cynical, or you could call that good politics.
True.
That if you're going to do some legislating, it always seems in our national politics that, oh my gosh, it's an election year, we can't do anything. Well, actually, that's when you should be doing the most.
Yeah.
You're fighting for your job. Do it really well, and we'll put you back.
That's when you prove to people what we have elected you for.
If we had a democracy answerable to the people, that's how things would work.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
But wouldn't that, if our votes really counted, our voices were just as loud as every other voice, one person, one voice, one vote, the then legislators in the year of their reelection would be working like crazy to get things done. To say, see, here's the job I'm doing.
It's a really good point.
And of course, the evidence is that it's the complete antithesis of that. We can't do anything whatsoever because we need to go raise money and beat up on the other guy, because that's how we get reelected now.
It's a really good point.
Thank you.
Yes. Well said, Shano. In other good news, lots of good news this morning. There was another protest this week. Lots of
activism.
Exactly. And I'm pointing this out because I get so furious by the corporate media not covering this stuff. I know.
By the end of the week, you're like, oh,
exactly.
I cannot believe what's going on. Look at all these Supreme Court rulings, and look at what Congress isn't doing. And oh my God, you get frustrated.
There are people standing up all around this country for what they believe in. Cool. And here's another one. A press event just Friday. Activists, students, transit workers, community organizers
dun, dun, dun.
actually went to congressional offices in 22 different cities to call on Congress to honor Dr. Martin Luther King's fight for economic justice. They're specifically calling for the Robin Hood tax, the tax on Wall Street.
Yeah.
22 cities. Not a word in the media. For people who don't know, April 4th was the day Martin Luther was killed. And so these activists went to all these different congressional offices and said, his work is not done.
Right.
Let's finish what he started. Let's, push for the movements.
And by the way, you're undoing the civil rights part of it too.
Yeah.
Of course.
But most people don't. Well, some people, I think people listening here know, but a lot of people don't realize that MLK didn't just fight for racial equality. He fought for economic equality.
Because they were intertwined.
Right.
They're inexorably intertwined.
Right.
That when there's economic equality, then you're going to have equality when it comes to politics, when it comes to getting a job, when it comes to housing, etc. Everything.
Right. So let's continue his work, and a great way to do it would be a Wall Street transaction tax. And one socialist commie hippie. One last bit of good news, and this is another, like you say, creating the parade, and some lawmakers are deciding to stand in front of it. Connecticut General Assembly has passed a bill to raise the state's minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. Granted, we can certainly talk about whether $10.10 is enough, but it's
more than $7.25.
Exactly.
That's all that I care.
This is great news. And
does it make it the highest?
They are now the highest minimum wage in the country.
Now let's see if everything explodes.
And lots of states are joining this movement. Yeah. Maryland just passed a bill. It's probably in the state Senate next week. 4 other states are looking at $10 an hour. 5 other states are considering $10.10 an hour. Lawmakers in these states are realizing this is good policy. This is good for their economy. This is good for the residents of their states, and they're not going to sit around and wait for Congress to get their act together.
And you do remember from the State of the Union, the president acknowledged that there would be some difficulties in the Congress doing this nationally. So he said, he pointed out, I think it was a pizza place in Minneapolis that had done it. He says, you locally can do it. So go ahead and do it. I ain't stopping you. Let's go for it. And sure enough, localities are doing it.
Exactly. So great news there. And we're going to talk more about minimum wage and about the fight for economic equality and lots more today. So much stuff going on. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano. Lots more in store. Stick around.
It reflects the drama of the human experience, and isn't that the essence of art?
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
I had the honor of interviewing Jill Stein, the actual Green Party presidential candidate for 2012. Our interview is at our website at filterfreeradio.com if you haven't watched it already. And in the conversation, I told Jill Stein, I was like, I used to work for Thom Hartmann. And where I'm at now is I'm developing a focus on the activism, on the participation, on the real difference making, not so much the political hearsay. And Jill Stein told me essentially words to the effect of, why is it that when people are abused, they always continue to keep running back to the abuser?
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Why do we keep running back to the Democratic Party that keeps abusing us when we as progressives should be progressing forward.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Hillary Tone. In a recent blog post, U.S. District Judge Richard Kopf called himself a dirty old man while offering rules for young women lawyers to follow when dressing for court. In the post, he comments on the, quote, ample chest of one such lawyer and advises others to tone it down so that law clerks won't label you, quote, an ignorant slut. On Fox News' The Five, co-host Brian Kilmeade then asserted that women should in fact use their assets to get ahead in the courtroom.
If you could try a case and you have an asset, which is a great body and a great figure, you got to do everything you can to be successful. So if it means somebody in the jury is going to be swung to your side because of the fact that you work out.
Yeah, but that's if you have all like male.
This isn't Kilmeade's first offense. In 2012, his comments prompted co-host Gretchen Carlson to walk off set.
Women are everywhere. We're letting them play golf and tennis now. It's out of control.
You know what?
You know.
You know what?
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Dear Republicans, this coming election year, progressives everywhere want to thank you from the bottom of our bleeding hearts for being you. Go! From your war on women, thanks for pissing off half the country. Oops. To the government shutdown, absolutely brilliant.
You must be stupid.
We'd send flowers to each and every clown and carnival barker in your broken, dysfunctional party, but instead, we're throwing a party. On Saturday, May 10th, the world-famous Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico for some good old midterm mocking. Stephanie Miller and her Sexy Liberal players will perform live on stage at Popejoy Hall. Tickets are available online at UNMtickets.com. Don't miss the Sexy Liberal Schadenfreude.
What the hell is that?
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, May 10th at Popejoy Hall in Albuquerque. Go to UNMtickets.com.
It's Thursday night, and you're grabbing drinks with some friends. Started off with a pitcher for the table, which quickly becomes two. There's pool. And there's the photo booth.
All right, everybody squeeze in. Say cheese.
Followed naturally by an order of wings. And another.
Can we get some extra ranch sauce?
Then there's the ceremonial nightcap.
So what are we doing this weekend?
And lastly, it's back to the car, which, if you're buzzed, could be the most expensive night of your life. Getting pulled over for buzzed driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzzed driving, because buzzed driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle, excuse me, and Shano. Thank you wherever you are checking us out, maybe listening to the podcast, hanging out over at SoFlo Radio, over in the chat room at TalkingLeft.com, or, of course, We Act Radio, 1480 AM in Washington, D.C. And stick around if you're listening on We Act for the D.C. premiere of Filter Free Radio.
And even if you're not listening on We Act, then go to We Act.
Yes, get your butt over there.
If you're listening on SoFlo, stay on SoFlo.
Yes, because there are great shows coming up on SoFlo Radio as well.
We're just promoting our buddy.
Exactly. Well, just like we promote Mr. George Rodriguez over at SoFlo. Does an amazing job providing
I know,
South
just
Florida.
listen over there. Sounds good.
Providing South Florida their only progressive talk station.
Indeed.
That's it's an important job.
Yeah. I've lived down there, and they need it.
Yes, they do.
Badly.
So before the break, we were talking about minimum wage and, economic justice. Mm-hmm. And one story stood out this week that I just could not believe.
You chuckled to yourself.
Yep.
I believed it.
Walmart admits our profits depend on their poverty. Basically, in the Walmart filing with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they had to list risk factors, things that could hurt their profitability. One of the ones they listed, or I guess one group of those they listed, was, quote, and this is from their filing, changes in the amount of payments made under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Plan or other public assistance plans, eligibility changes in the eligibility requirements of those public assistance plans.
Right.
Essentially, when Congress doesn't renew food stamps or makes big cuts to food stamps, Walmart loses a lot of money.
Well, Walmart employees lose that benefit, and therefore either Walmart's got to pay it or they lose employees. Employees have to go to someplace else.
Right. Well, this is a twofold. Their poverty wages leave many employees on government assistance plans. In many states, Walmart is actually the largest. Walmart employees
are the largest
group of Medicaid recipients.
Wow.
Yeah. But this also hits twofold because, number one, their workers don't get that money and they actually have to, pay people a little bit more. They lose out on some profits there.
Right.
And also, because of what Walmart does to communities, by killing local business, making themselves the only place that people can shop or people can afford to shop, when people don't have that food stamp money, they're not going and buying food at Walmart.
Yeah. They're probably the main beneficiaries of these SNAP payments.
Right.
The money essentially just funnels from the government to the employees, and the employees just spend it at Walmart.
Right. To give you an idea, in just 1 year, 1 year, 9 Walmart supercenters in Massachusetts received more than $33 million in SNAP benefits. $33 million in 1 year. That's outrageous. Their profits, they could still make a profit and pay employees more. And in fact, they've gotten such bad press lately that they're starting to realize that.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, their executives came out this week and said, well, we're going to begin adding worker hours. We're not going to keep people on part-time,
2025
minimum wage, because number one, it hurts their stores.
Yep.
They can't stock shelves and customers get TO'd and PO'd, ticked off.
Oh, okay.
And go to other places. But it also hurts PR. People don't want to shop there because of how they...
Only so many little, ads with the big yellow smiley face saying, we love working here.
Yeah. I mean, they've cut their workforce so bad. They've opened 600 new stores in the past 5 years, but employed 20,000 fewer people than they did in 2008. However, this policy is backfiring on them. Their financial instruments were downgraded.
Yeah.
And they're having to actually step up and...
You know what? Great. But yet again, they are only motivated by one thing: putting more zeros behind the numbers they have in their bank accounts. If we didn't have such huge corporations, especially in retail, if we had these smaller ones, then there would be a personal connection with the individuals who work at the store you own, and you couldn't look them in the eye and pay them as little as Walmart did.
Right.
It's having that distance, that diffusion of responsibility towards your employees is the real issue. It's great that they may be paying people more. It's great they may be giving them more hours. Trust me, it's going to be just minor enough to get what they want. It has nothing to do with whether or not their employees are doing well. And it would be better if we had the smaller retail stores where they really cared.
And it would be better for communities, better for workers, better for everybody. But at least they have been shamed into...
I think it's a great thing to point to say this is why we still shouldn't shop at Walmart. I'm sorry.
I agree. Anyhow. Lots more in store. We're going to come back with our friend, educator, teacher, mathematics, natural science, and more, Mr. Kapolakis, on minimum wage and the history of minimum wage. Very interesting stuff coming up. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we'll be back with more.
It's Hal Sparks from the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide, and this is Talking Left.
On a recent morning, after checking news reports, I thought, what a freaky news day. Freaky story number one was about the governor of Texas, who rarely has any ideas, but apparently one had unexpectedly erupted from the usually dormant cluster of low-voltage brain cells in the head of Rick Perry. The headline on the story says the Gov had declared to the entire nation, "Bring us nuclear waste." Bizarre. While any quasi-sane governor would be trying to protect the state, its people, and future generations from the highly radioactive detritus of the nuclear power industry, here was Governor Goober waving in the waste. This is the same governor who adamantly rejected federal dollars to provide health coverage for millions of uninsured Texans. It seems that his health care plan is for each poor family to put a cask of nuclear waste in their closet. Freaky story number 2 was about the formation of a partnership for a new American economy. Great! At last, we'll get moving on conversion to the green economy, infrastructure expansion, and reinvestment in middle-class jobs. Oh, come on. Stop making sense. This new economy bunch turns out to be hyping more of the old low-wage economy. It's made up of fast food chains, agribusiness outfits, and other operators that want Congress to create a steady stream of cheap immigrant laborers to exploit. Finally, freaky story number 3 was about the plan of congressional Republicans to help the rising number of poor people by effectively eliminating the federal food stamp program. How does that help, you might wonder? The lead pusher of the plan explains that it, quote, empowers recipients to get off the aid rolls. This is Jim Hightower saying all this freakiness was in the news on April Fool's Day, but none of it was a joke. Now that's really freaky.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. A monster out to maul federal workers. That's how American Federation of Government Employees President David Cox Sr. describes the latest budget proposal from Republican Wisconsin Representative Paul Ryan. Cox called the budget an insatiable monster, not content with the $138 billion it's already extracted from federal workers through pay freezes and other cuts. Cox calls Ryan's new budget morally repulsive and intellectually dishonest. Ryan's budget would require more money from federal worker take-home pay to be diverted to their pensions, amounting to a 6% cut in take-home pay. It would also take money out of the federal retirement system and put it into a 401k-style plan. There are other unspecified cuts to federal employee pay and benefits as well. The Ryan budget would cut $5.1 trillion from the federal budget over 10 years. 2 women who say they were McDonald's managers for years are saying that they participated in wage theft from McDonald's workers, and it was systematic. In a video posted on YouTube, Kwanzaa Brooks said in part,
I think the worst thing that I was ever asked to do would be to really adjust a person's time. That is the worst, because they did the work. They were there, and they deserve to get paid for what they did. It's a job. It's not right. It's not fair.
Lakia Williams says she was a McDonald's manager for years as well, and she describes how managers stole wages from workers.
On several occasions, had employees come and work either before their shift or either stay after their shift. I've had employees literally clock out to work because they were either going into overtime or labor was getting extremely high, and we had to balance it.
A national poll of fast food workers shows 89% of them report having wages illegally taken from them. The Hart Research poll surveyed 1,008 fast food workers in 10 cities. The China Labor Bulletin says Walmart workers in Chengde are standing firm on their demand for a doubling of compensation offered by Walmart as the store there closes. Walmart has made a lesser offer, and it's trying to get workers to accept that. But the Chengde Walmart trade union is urging the workers to stand firm and not be tempted by unripe fruit. The Chinese Walmart workers demanded collective bargaining with the Chinese Walmart store after management announced March 4th that the store was closing. When the closing was announced, the workers were told to accept layoffs or move to another store, but they organized to demand compensation for the closing.
Workers Independent News is proud to be heard on The Union Edge, Labor's Talk Radio. Live nationwide weekdays noon to 3 p.m. at theunionedge.com.
Workers Independent News puts workers and their unions on the national radio news airwaves every day. To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I started going cold turkey. Well, at least when I'm in the car.
I know I shouldn't do it, but it's so hard to stop. That's why I hide it from myself, so I won't be tempted.
I used to do it all the time. I stopped by locking it in my glove compartment.
My friend used to do it way too much. Now I turn it off when we're in the car.
My solution is simple. I just don't do it.
There are lots of ways to stop yourself and others from texting and driving. How will you stop? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. There has been so much in the news recently about minimum wage and the lack of Congress stepping up and increasing it. And our good friend, Mr. Kopolakis from Seattle, a man of many talents, educator, teacher of mathematics, natural science, social science, music, and advocate for new ideas for a progressive America, had some thoughts on that and wanted to share them with us. Mr. Kopolakis, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, good morning, Danielle. Good morning, Shano.
We are very happy to have you. So what's your take on minimum wage? Why is this such an issue in Congress, and when are we going to get it done?
Well, I think the issue, it goes back a long way. And it speaks to where the Republican Party would like to take us, which is back a long way, about 100 years. What I'd like to talk about is I think we all know that wages really need to go up for the lowest paid amongst us in our society. Our economy is sputtering because no one has any money to spend. Yet the richest at the top, they seem to have plenty of money to spend, and they don't seem to have a problem with that. They have plenty of money to spend on campaign contributions, as we noted this week by the Supreme Court. But so I'd like to sort of I'd like to look at some of their criticisms of why the minimum wage should be raised or should not be raised.
Yeah, I mean, they all seem pretty baloney to me, to use a word that's safe for radio. But, they talk about that it's going to kill jobs. I totally disagree with that. What are your thoughts?
Well, it never has. I think that, the idea that, let me go back a little bit. I was thinking about a little bit of the history of the minimum wage, and I think it's interesting, and I want to get to that question in a second, but because it is about 100 years old, we're going to see the same playbook all over again. This whole thing started in 1905, that is wage and hour disputes, with a case called Lochner versus New York, in which the state of New York had made a law that a 10-hour a day, 6-day-a-week work week for bakers. And it was challenged in the Supreme Court because, and the reason the state did that was for the health and safety of the workers, of the bakers. They breathe a lot of dust and so on. And this law went to the Supreme Court. It was challenged in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court shot it down. Said no, it's a violation of the right to contract. The liberty of contract is what they said. And since that time, for about the next 30 years, leading up to our first minimum wage law, which was upheld by the Supreme Court, it was called the Lochner era, which the Supreme Court seemed to support every liberty to contract. So they didn't want no interference. The government can't interfere. In the 3 years later, in 1908, they did change their mind, however, and rule in a case called Muller versus Oregon that no, women couldn't be forced to work more than 10 hours in a laundry. You see? So they did recognize some difference, and the reason was for health reasons. And then again, in Oregon, there was a case in Oregon that was the Oregon law that set a 10-hour workday with time and a half for over 10 hours was passed in 1917, and that was upheld. But the big case came in the 1920s with a case called Adkins versus Children's Hospital, and it was where the Congress in 1918 had set a minimum wage for, this is why I point this out, women and children in the District of Columbia, and this was challenged, and the court, a very conservative court at that time, much like the court today, they had four very conservative justices, along with the Chief Justice, who was William Howard Taft, former president. They struck down this minimum wage law. And and this was for women and children. Apparently, men are able to secure fair wage employment, but women and children, no. In 1937, the law came up, a Washington State law. It's odd that Washington, D.C. and here Washington State law, West Coast Hotels versus Parrish, was challenged. The Washington State minimum wage law was challenged, and it was finally upheld. And that was the first time a minimum wage law was upheld. And in 1938, finally, a 25 cent an hour minimum wage law was established by the National Labor Board, and it had been challenged also in 1941. It was upheld. So what we see here is this is an issue that's gone back, over 100 years, and I kind of think that that's where the Republicans would like to take us.
Yeah, I mean, it shows from what you just said, that was a 33 just to secure a minimum wage. It kind of puts things into perspective about the fight we're having right now to increase it.
Right, and when you look at where it is, since like I said, 1938, they established a 25 cent an hour minimum wage law. Ours is the federal minimum wage at this time is $7.25 an hour. Let's look at what that is and make some comparisons. $7.25. I was downtown in Seattle the week before last, and I noticed that you can hardly park your car for $7.25 an hour. I mean, that must be true in Washington, D.C. or New York or a lot of the cities in a lot of big cities around the country. I know that try to park at the airport for $7.25 an hour. So what we're saying is that 120 square feet of empty concrete space is worth the same as a person's working. And it's an outrageous thing. And then you think about, what is the price of gasoline? You can burn $7.25 of gasoline in your car, I guarantee, in less than an hour.
Yeah, probably.
Don't you think? I don't know, what is the price of gasoline in Washington, D.C.?
It's about $3.50 a gallon.
Okay, $3.50. It's a little higher here. So that leads me to a comparison. We talked about the adjusted minimum wage. The $10.10 an hour minimum wage that President Obama is proposing is actually a little bit low for when the federal minimum wage in 1968 went to $1.60 an hour. That was the time at which it had its highest purchasing power. Now, to compare what we're just talking about is in 1968 a gallon of gas was 34 cents a gallon. So with your $1, with your $1.60, you could nearly buy 5 gallons of gas, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, adjusted for inflation, I've read that the $1.60 would be now, in today's terms, $10.64. That's adjusted for inflation only, though. It's not adjusted for spending power, because still $10.64 can't buy $5 or 5 gallons worth of gasoline.
Right.
Even at $3.50 a gallon, that's $17.50. So the minimum wage, to stay the same as it were in 1968, would have to be somewhere around $17, maybe upwards of $20, if it were to have the same spending power as it did in 1968. And that's what I have to say. When you're talking about minimum wage employers who say that I just couldn't pay you a penny more, I don't find them to be job creators. I think they're time wasters. I mean, they're really.
Yeah, I like that expression. I think the real job creators are the people who go out and spend money. The people who might make more than minimum wage.
Absolutely. And look at it this: when you compare again the $7.25 in terms of the 1968 terms, if we had taken the hour restrictions of the old Supreme Court decisions off, and you take your $7.25 an hour to make as much as you would have to make in a 40-hour week at $1.60 an hour in 1968, you would have to work at $7.25 an hour about 59 hours a week, straight time, or if part of that were overtime, you'd have to work about 53 hours a week just to make what you would on a 40-hour week in 1968.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to just what you said a few minutes ago, that it's the Republicans want to bring us back to the 50s or before. They liked that era. They'd like to keep it there, and progressives want to move forward. I mean, I think that's the whole dynamic between the two political groups.
Well, yeah, and I think that what's happening, this is corporate driven. I mean, this isn't small business driven, because what's really happening here, when you talk about what will, like you said, what will happen with the layoffs and so on, I don't believe that. When we talk about, and we'll get to this point about, if you raise the minimum wage, it'll cause layoffs. Well, wait a minute. That sort of presumes that the minimum wage sector of the economy is overstaffed, doesn't it? It means they have extra people running around with nothing to do.
Yes.
I mean, think about it. If you're running your fast food joint, you need a burger flipper, a fries person, a drive-up window person, and a front counter person. So if we raise the minimum wage, are you going to say, oh, no, now I don't need my drive-up window person, or I don't need my fries guy. The burger person could do both jobs. Well, if the burger person could do both jobs, why wasn't he doing it before?
Yeah, well, and we have seen that to a certain degree. We've seen American productivity increase exponentially, especially with computers and technology, where one person is doing the work today that 5 or 10 people did 20 years ago. But there still is a point at which you can't go beyond that, where one person can't operate 7 computers. You still have a limit, a hard limit there, where if you need X number of people to run your business, no matter what you have to pay for, if you have the demand, you have a reason to be in business, you're going to have to hire those people.
Sure, and I also think that when they say that's the way, I've heard people say, well, that's the way businesses save money. I like the way the conservative right wing, they dictate to everybody else how businesses run, because they know, they're the experts. I mean, no, it's not the way businesses save money. If there's demand for your product, you don't just say, okay, half of my staff can take a hike. If you've got to put your product out, you've got to put your product out, and you need people to do it. The way businesses do save money, though, as we've all noticed in the grocery store, is your 16-ounce box of crackers is now your 14.5-ounce box of crackers. It's the same price or 20 cents more.
Right, but they're not taking that 20 cents and giving it to employees. They're putting it in their pocket or giving it to shareholders. It's, it just shows how the talking points we hear about minimum wage are complete nonsense. I think that's why states are picking up this, task and raising the state minimum wages to $10 an hour, $10 an hour, like we're seeing pass all over the place. I know there's so much more to talk about this. We're running up on time here, but we'll have to have you back and go through these issues, a little bit more in detail, one at a time. Is that sound good to you?
Sounds great. I've enjoyed it.
All right, great. Mr. Kopolakis, everybody, from Seattle, you will hear him here on Talking Left again very soon to break down these issues and expose the fact that these talking points against minimum wage are just that, talking points, and we don't want to go back to the 1950s. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and we will be back with more, so stick around.
Awesome! Totally awesome! All right! It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Salvatore Calalori. With Obamacare signups surpassing the administration's goal of 7 million signups, it's now clear that the enrollment was an unmitigated success. But Fox News has been working for months to undermine the ACA, and they have continued to downplay positive news about Obamacare now that the goal has been met. On The Five, Fox's Jesse Waters attempted to undermine positive news about Obamacare.
I actually think the White House is straight up lying about these numbers. They're saying 7 million people signed up on the website that was broken for the last 9 months.
Charles Krauthammer did the same on Fox News' special report.
Look, this is a phony number. It's meaningless because, A, we don't know how many of them are paid.
But these talking points are all too predictable. On CNN's Reliable Sources, guest Elise Vibeck commented,
"It's interesting, Fox News in particular constantly asks at any point when Obamacare news is reported, well, how many people have paid? And certainly we note that in all of our articles, how many people have paid, 80, 90%.
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
The news of
of raising the minimum wage sounded great, $11.50 an hour in Washington, D.C. and in Maryland, in the counties in Maryland, where I used to live in Montgomery County. Sounds great, but I thought I heard something in there that wasn't too hot. What was that one little bit there?
That's scheduled to be in place by 2016.
Oh, that part. Right. Yeah, well, sure, we'll throw you a bone. A couple years from now. So what is your New Year's revolution? Do you make minimum wage and you can't survive?
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
The fact of the matter is, it's not nearly enough, doesn't go far enough. Raising the minimum wage will help people, and it's part of building resistance movements, getting those who just disenfranchised college students who are unemployed and underemployed, along with the service sector workers who are all living in poverty. If you're able to get those two facets of our society together and organize them, well, then we should have a revolt. We should have enough to shut down parts of our system in order to demand a higher living standard, better quality of life, just for starters. And nothing will change unless you make it. So hope should be a goal, not just a wish. And then you do something about it.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
You heard that right, Minnesota. Michelle Bachmann is leaving Congress. And to celebrate, it's out with the crazy.
Bye-bye.
And in with the sexy. Backed by overwhelming popular demand, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Minneapolis June 7th at the State Theater. Comedic geniuses John Fugelsang and Carlos Alazraqui will perform live on stage with the star of all progressive media, Stephanie Miller.
Are they pro-America or anti-America?
Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com. Don't miss this evening of political comedy with a special goodbye to Michelle and Marcus, too.
Clang, clang, clang goes the trolley!
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, live June 7th at the State Theater in Minneapolis. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
Hi, this is Savannah Guthrie with an urgent story developing right now in every state and county across America. Despite having more than enough food available in this country, there are nearly 16 million kids, that's 1 in 5 children, struggling with hunger. They often don't even know where their next meal is coming from. And the worst part is, this has been going on for years. There's no excuse for it, and that's why Feeding America is doing its best to put an end to childhood hunger. As a nationwide network of food banks, Feeding America engages local communities in solving hunger by collecting surplus food, giving hope to hungry kids and their families all across our nation. But they need your help. Join me in supporting Feeding America and your local food bank. You can start by going to feedingamerica.org to learn more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're Feeding America.
A message from Feeding America and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. Of course,
and someone's in the chat room, aren't they?
Oh, yes. So, a certain friend of ours is in the chat room and wanted to wish Mr. Sanchez a very good morning.
And we're not going to talk about chemtrails.
No. We love him.
Sanchez was back when it was funked in the head.
Yes.
Years and years. We'd get back on.
Yes, we do.
If he's willing.
Yes. We might want to ask him first before announcing that on the radio.
We probably should.
So we all heard this week about a huge court case, McCutcheon, and of course, Hobby Lobby. However, there was another court case, and it's still ongoing, that is very interesting. Yeah. And we wanted to talk about it.
And actually, we've covered it before.
Yes, we covered the precursor and the...
And I think at some point this is going to break through in the mainstream. Because this kind of goes along with privacy and everyone being connected in the internets and
right.
And it's it has to do with speech and privacy and all those things that the NSA deals with. But this is at the corporate level.
It's being called an internet free speech case, and it's heading to the Virginia Supreme Court this month.
Oh, it's doomed.
The case is Yelp. Where I think most people are familiar with Yelp business reviews.
Yeah.
And business owners say that the anonymity of these comments, these negative reviews, is unfair because, as there's some pretty fair arguments here by these business owners that these are fake reviews. That for instance, one of the companies involved is a carpet cleaning company.
Right.
And one of these supposed reviews is in a city that they don't even do business in.
Right.
So the question is, in this case, does Yelp have to release the names of these anonymous commenters to the business owners so that they can challenge these negative reviews? Yelp is saying that doing so would be a violation of their free speech.
Right. But see, the thing is that, and this is for the Sarah Palins of the world, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, it says the government shall make no laws, or actually the Congress shall make no laws infringing on the freedom of speech. Corporations do it all the time, and they can do so legally. So the question is here, when these companies sue Yelp and then say, okay, it's time for discovery, time to turn over information. And Yelp says, wait a minute, I still don't want to turn over this information. You're suing us. And the judge says, no, you have discovery. You have to do it. Is the judge directing that? Is that then the government in the direction of turning that over? Therefore, people say, oh my gosh, a judge could turn over my personal information. I'm not going to speak. Therefore, chilling speech.
Right. However, these business owners claim that these reviews often appear after refusing to advertise on Yelp. Now,
I'd be interested to read the actual complaint against Yelp.
Right. For instance, a business owner in Montclair, New Jersey, said he was contacted, he or she, it doesn't say here, but I was contacted by a Yelp salesperson to advertise. I declined, and only since then have negative reviews suddenly posted on that person's Yelp business site. The Alexandria Circuit Court and the Virginia Court of Appeals have both sided with the business owners in this case.
I'm shocked. Like I said, they're doomed going to the Virginia Supreme Court.
However, Yelp appealed to the state Supreme Court, arguing that the reviews are protected under the First Amendment and that the business owner...
reviews are not protected under the First Amendment. We'll just say that right now. So other than the argument I made that the judge making them turn it over discovery may somehow chill speech, I think it's a really problematic argument. The thing is what concerns me is these businesses go after Yelp, not really to go after Yelp.
Right.
They've kind of made this up in order to get the names of the people, because the last time we covered this, it was a business going after the reviewer.
Well, and that's how this case started.
And then they get all the names of these reviewers and they go sue them. And on top of it, these people who have purchased something through this small little company, in the terms and conditions says, if you post something negative about our company, we can sue you for $1 gazillion. You're not knowing that they've signed away their free speech rights, which you can do with a business. It's not the government infringing on your rights.
Well, it's a very clear example of how sometimes these issues are not black and white.
Oh, they aren't. And the thing is that we want more and more. We want discussion, and I think that people are smart enough to look at Yelp and say, that one's nonsense. That's from somebody else. And I think if Yelp were to put something in there saying the business could reply, kind of like on a credit report. I mean, let's not even go there, I guess. But you could, underneath there, they could just say, please note this reviewer is from in a city that we don't even do business.
Right.
So then when someone's going through and reading Yelp, you haven't cut down on speech. Everyone's been able to say what they want to say. And you say, well, that review's nonsense.
I am a strong defender of free speech.
More speech, I say.
Yes.
More.
But, these businesses, these are just small businesses. These are mom and pop businesses, the type that we like to support. And they are experiencing real harm from this.
And if it is true that Yelp is doing this, that essentially is saying, if you don't advertise with us, we're going to mess with your reviews.
Right.
That is a real problem, because that's fraud.
To give you an idea, there's been over 2,000 complaints filed against Yelp to the FTC just since 2008. From business owners. And in fact, this one guy, Mr. Hadid, it's a carpet cleaning business, sank 30%. His whole business is based off of internet reviews. He's a small business. He's not paying to advertise on your local TV channel. Right. His business declined 30% in 2012. He had to let 80 workers go.
What also concerns me is we've seen what Walmart can do to a small businesses in the community. Who's to say? And I'm not saying, okay, let's say a big giant store comes in that doesn't have a lot of scruples. I don't want to point out any particular company.
Right.
And usually they use predatory pricing, right? They'll undercut the local ones to drive them out of business. They'll do all kinds of different things. They now have another tool. this is a tool they could use. And I'm not saying they have. There's not evidence of it, but they could. So that concerns me as well. Small businesses, we do need to protect them. But then we're talking about speech here.
Right.
Wow. This is a tough one.
It's a tough one.
The thing that I'm really worried about is going after individual people. And that's what I thought this case was about, because I think that's the next step.
It is the next step. And that's actually how it started. Like this guy, Mr. Hadid,
that's what it's really about.
He tried to sue the 7 reviewers for defamation and couldn't do so because he had to demand that Yelp turned over the information. And that's where that case stalled while, Yelp says, I don't have to turn over this information.
And if Yelp has to turn it over, why doesn't Twitter and Facebook then?
But Twitter and Facebook have had to.
Right. But under only certain circumstances. This is a commerce situation, not a national security situation. There's a difference.
It's a very interesting case. We will watch it as it moves forward.
Yeah. I'm going to read more about it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go read the briefs.
I certainly don't want anything that chills speech.
As we talk for 3 hours on Sunday
mornings. But these businesses are experiencing real harm. These are small mom and pop companies that can't afford to, this is how they get their advertising.
Right.
So hopefully there's some middle ground here.
The idea of the business being able to respond.
Yeah, there's a solution.
More speech.
Exactly.
I think the answer is always more talking.
Speaking of speech.
Speaking of talking.
Speaking of speech and talking and things that aren't speech, like money.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the McCutcheon case next. And the future of the Tea Party. Interesting theory from Mr. Shano. Coming up next. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. We'll be back. Stick around.
It's just implied, but we all know what's going on in this thought bubble. The kids don't know, but we do.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Terrestrial radio, they don't want us or yous around no more, so...
They hit us, so hit them back.
SoFloRadio.com.
It's Thursday, March 27, 2014.
This will have to be reckoned with as a failure of policy, given the repeated warning over and over and over again over a period of generations in clarion terms, warning that this was going to happen.
More disturbing details on the deadly Washington landslide. Rooftop solar will endanger the electric grid?
That's another shit argument,
says the former energy secretary. Plus,
there's a huge procrastination penalty when it comes to emitting carbon into the atmosphere.
Irreversible climate change could arrive as early as 2036.
All of those irreversible penalties and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Solar energy has always sounded way too gay for rednecks. Instead, say, invade the sun and take its oil.
There you go. Now we're talking. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, earlier this week, I spoke about the repeated warning from scientists, geomorphologists up in Washington State, warning against catastrophic failure that has, in fact, happened up there in this landslide, deadly, horrible landslide. You've got more information on that today.
Yes. Right now, as we go to air, 25 dead and 90 still missing. And while near record rainfall was the direct cause of the landslide, the Seattle Times reports that excessive logging may have contributed, with aerial photos indicating a clear-cut logging operation went outside the safe boundary approved by regulators in the area and stripped trees from the mountaintop directly above where the landslide occurred.
And you can see this clear cutting in these photographs from the U.S. Geological Survey. The cutting comes down just to where the entire side of that mountain just gave away.
Yeah, and anti-logging activists say state regulators really aren't doing enough to rein in logging companies.
Color me shocked.
The oil industry is celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Exxon Valdez oil spill with a spate of new oil spills. As we reported earlier this week, first there was the significant crude oil spill into Galveston Bay. Now, a BP refinery in Michigan that was just upgraded has spilled 21,000 gallons of crude oil into Chicago's water supply, Lake Michigan. Way to go, BP.
Way to go, oil industry. Unbelievable.
Climate change is going to affect nearly every aspect of human life and will cost trillions of dollars in lost economic output. That's the cheerful consensus from a leaked draft of the next UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. It focuses on the impacts of climate change and is due out next week. Now, the window to act on climate change by cutting emissions is closing, according to Michael Mann of the famous hockey stick temperature graph. In a new paper, the climate scientist calculates that at our current rate of carbon dioxide emissions, we will hit 450 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere as early as 2036, and that has consequences, as he explains to Tom Hartman.
If you do the math, we hit that 450 parts per million number in a matter of a couple decades, and we probably lock in at least 2 degrees Celsius and some very dangerous and potentially irreversible impacts on the planet.
Got that? In just 22 years, we commit to global temperatures rising at least 2 degrees Celsius. And it won't stop there.
The CO2 we are putting into the atmosphere right now is going to add to warming for decades into the future. It will cause sea level to rise for centuries into the future. So there's a huge procrastination penalty when it comes to emitting carbon into the atmosphere.
And I suspect we are not going to be ready to pay that penalty.
Not at our current rate, but there is some good news. Renewable energy technologies are up faster than predicted, booming around the world. Wind and solar made up nearly 90% of all new electricity generation installed in the U.S. just last year.
And when you say booming, unlike with the oil and natural gas, you don't mean exploding. You mean it's actually increasing in sales around the country.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Speaking of the boom in renewable energy, former Energy Secretary Stephen Chu has a blunt message for utilities trying to preserve their monopoly over electricity by trying to kill off rooftop solar. He says it's, quote, bull. He says utilities should instead embrace the rooftop solar revolution and adapt their business model.
As solar and batteries especially get cheaper and cheaper, the utility company partnership with a private company owns the modules. They own the battery. They use your roof. They sell you electricity for cheaper.
Yeah, you know, like it or not, we live in a capitalist society. There are all kinds of ways for people to make money off of renewable energy. The problem is they are ways that will cut into the profits of the fossil fuel industry, oil, coal, natural gas. That is the only reason for this ongoing war on science, this ongoing war on reason. For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Please consider a donation to help us stay on your public airwaves. And don't forget, you can download us anytime via iTunes, Stitcher, or TuneIn, where we hope you will leave us a good review so more people will hear the Green News Report. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and on the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
I'm sold 3008. You sold.
Broadcasting live from Washington, D.C. This is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back, everybody, to Talking Left. Thank you wherever you are hanging out with us. SoFlo Radio, hanging out in the chat room, listening to the podcast, or We Act Radio, 1480 AM WPWC in Washington, D.C., where you can hear Jacob Dean,
Filter Free Radio,
and Skeptical Scott, and Filter Free Radio coming up next after this show, the Washington, D.C. premiere of Filter Free Radio.
Yay.
Very, very excited. Yes. So... I'll learn to use the box.
Not even going there.
Yes, exactly. So, of course, this week, the big, humongous news was the McCutcheon case and the Supreme Court deciding to blow up campaign finance limits.
Yeah.
Shane, you have an interesting theory about this. Why don't we recap really quickly? McCutcheon was not striking down all the limits.
Yeah, essentially, you can put campaign limits in 3 different groups. Citizens United got rid of one of them. And it's, everyone's calling McCutcheon Citizens United on steroids. It's not. It's a little bit lesser. It's very important. Citizens United, of course, got rid of limits on outside spending by anybody, including corporations. Super PACs, essentially issue ads, kind of. There are also limits on how much you can give an individual candidate. This includes anybody. a corporation can't write a check to Ted Cruz for $1 million. There's still limits on that per election cycle. There's a limit on actual PACs, the Republican National Committee, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. There's a limit on that. Those stay in place. There was another set of limits that were enacted in the 70s, and they were reaffirmed in the 70s, and that were struck down by this McCutcheon case. Sean McCutcheon, an Alabama businessman, donated these maximums to a number of candidates. Actually, he very cute. He donated $1,776 to a number of candidates. 1776, trying to make a statement here. And there's an aggregate cap. Like when you add all of your contributions together, and we're not talking to outside spending, we're talking to PAC spending and individual campaign spending. There's an aggregate limit of about, exactly $123,200. And then this essentially was put in place to stop essentially kind of like a version of money laundering, where you would put a ton of money in one place, but they would get branched out or consolidated and then given to one candidate. So you give it to 3 different PACs. So you say, here, I'm going to give to the Republican National Committee, one for every single person who's a Republican running it, and then they just funnel all of it into one campaign.
Right.
So in other words, it's a one step away from being able to give someone $1 million. McCutcheon challenged this, won. The Supreme Court said that campaign spending limits only can be constitutional is if they serve, of course, a compelling government interest. This is the constitutional analysis, blah, 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 blah. Strict scrutiny, medium scrutiny, all that stuff. It's kind of, this one is a little bit less than strict scrutiny. But what they did is, when you define compelling government interest, if you can define it narrowly enough, you'll never reach it. And that's what the majority did. John Roberts and the 4 other conservative justices said, well, actually, 3 other conservative justices joined by the craziest conservative justice, only in the opinion, we'll get to that in a second, said that the only compelling government interest is a quid pro quo, essentially a bribe. If you hand a check to the RNC and said, if you enact my bill, the Shelley Adelson bill, very narrow, you'd never be able to pass this test, therefore striking it down. Justice Thomas went even further, saying I'd strike them all down, including those limits you put on individual campaigns.
Right.
And that's next. That's next. We'll watch for it. It's coming. It's coming for one very important reason. And the people that are going to be really happy about McCutcheon aren't just Republicans. RNC Reince Priebus was out there. Yahoo! This is the best thing ever. He heard cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. But also Democratic PACs, the actual parties, are going to be making a good deal more money.
Essentially, this allows, just to put in layman's terms here, one person to donate huge sums of money to the party with a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is to be split among all candidates.
Or, however, you really can't direct it, but, you know how it works.
And I think it's interesting.
But what happens is when the parties become stronger, everyone will agree, I think on every side of the aisle, middle, sides, extremes, etc., that this makes the parties stronger. When the parties become stronger, however, that means that the real outside the party trying to change the parties, we'll call them the Tea Party, lose power.
Right.
Imagine a situation now where Ted Cruz says, I want to go read Green Eggs and Ham on the Senate floor. You could have a situation where the party says, if you go do that, Ted Cruz, we're going to stop sending you money from the party. And you know what? The party's getting a lot of money now. So the party has a lot more power. And I think this really is going to lead to the end of the Tea Party. You're going to have a lot more. This makes the establishment stronger. And you remember there's so many cases where a Tea Party candidate went in and the Democrat won because they got the crazies, especially in the Senate races. Mm-hmm. Notice that's wound down.
Yes.
There's only one left, I think, Mississippi at this point.
I think it's very interesting that you came up with this theory Monday or so, and Friday.
I couldn't have. Because the decision was Wednesday.
Oh, well, it was the very day that the decision came out. You were discussing this with me. And on Friday, a New York Times piece comes out. For many Republican incumbents, challenges from the right fizzle. These Tea Party candidates, just the ones that you're talking about, all of a sudden are getting no cash. And without cash, these days, you can't run a campaign.
And the thing is, you say, well, this is going to lead to more money in politics. Well, yeah, it is, but incrementally more. It's just where the money's going to go. And for people who are gazillionaires, before they had to give it to the outside. Now they can now give it to the inside. And the inside has the structure, and they figure they can get their will be done a lot easier through the structure. I imagine a situation now where the party's just going to railroad in and coronate their nominee for president. I mean, they've got all the rules set up this way. The Republican Party is going to be very strong in dictating who gets nominated where for everything. And so we're going to see the end of the extremists, the right-wing challengers. And you could actually say that McCutcheon, of all things, might bring the Republican Party less to the extreme right. I'm not going to say it's going to moderate them, but it might move them incrementally less away from the cliff of the right.
That's an interesting part. I don't know that we had gotten to that off air. I think that's
because if you have a legitimate extremist,
however,
Tea Party,
would it have
you have to change your rhetoric in that primary. Right? You have to move to the right to stamp them out.
But does that mean it would have the opposite effect on the Democrats?
It's exactly. Just about to get there. Those who say we need a progressive party, we need a labor party, it's going to make it just as difficult. Third parties are done under McCutcheon. Done. I mean, and when we look back in terms of the nails in the coffin of democracy, there's one more to come, but this is the penultimate. Yeah. Nail in the coffin of democracy.
I think, the money in politics is the battle of our time. It is
John Roberts said straight out that may be money in politics may be something we'd all like to eradicate, but it's a necessary evil of the First Amendment. It's kind of like letting Nazis protest. But it all goes back to whether spending money is speech. And I mean, this has been brought up maybe one or two times. I've heard on the national media, and it's just squashed like, oh, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Of course, money is speech. The Supreme Court has said so.
Yeah.
It's something that really does need to be reexamined.
Yeah. The quote
if it isn't reexamined, then it's got to be changed by we the people.
The quote you're talking about from Roberts, money in politics may at times seem repugnant to some, but so too does much of what the First Amendment vigorously protects. If the First Amendment protects flag burning, funeral protests, and Nazi parades, despite the profound offense such spectacles cause, it surely protects political campaign speech despite popular opinion.
It protects campaign speech, but is spending $1 campaign speech.
Well, I
know a lot of progressives say money is not speech. No, money is not speech, but is spending money speech? It's a much more difficult question. Burning a flag is speech. It's an action, though, right? Burning a flag is speech. Why is not spending money, not the actual dollar? A dollar equaling speech is ridiculous. And if we couch it that way, everyone goes, of course, money isn't speech. Is spending money speech? It's a tough one. I know it's really tough.
I don't know. I don't want to go there.
I know you don't, because then we have to accept Robert's reasoning that.
Well, but even taking that reasoning aside, you could still argue that there is a vested interest, compelling interest to regulate money in politics because of bribery.
Right. Well, it's not even bribery. It doesn't have to be, here's $1, this is what I want.
Right. Quid pro quo.
And I'm just telling you that the way the money can be routed now, it may not be, per se bribery, but it's so close. And the majority even said, well, having access and having their ear, that isn't undue influence. They call it gratitude.
Yeah, gratitude. The general gratitude a candidate may feel towards those who support him or his allies, or the political access such support may afford.
They don't consider that corruption.
It's not corruption. It's not bribery. It's gratitude.
And you remember when we talked about the actual arguments, Scalia used that term over and over. His side won. The thing is what's going to happen is that you're going to have the next one. And at some point, democracy is going to not be democracy. That the will of the people is going to be so far removed from what actually occurs in the outcome of an election that there's going to be a real reaction by the masses of people. That there is going to be such a division between the outcome and what we actually want.
I think we're there now. It's just people aren't aware of it.
Right. But it has to get extreme enough for people to say, wait a minute. It can't just be a little pinprick. It's like punch in the face. Like, are you kidding me? That's not who I voted for. That's not what I wanted.
Well, it'll be interesting as this plays out to see what happens in this election cycle with Tea Party candidates. We're already seeing a lot of them go quietly by the wayside. It's just, however, I don't want this to also push out the strong progressive candidates, the Alan Grayson, Keith Ellison, also, the people who stand up for what we actually want.
There's also a lot of Tea Party candidates we have to thank for having moderate Democrats put into the Senate.
Yeah. Be interesting.
Watch what happens.
Watch what happens. Keep an eye on this one, and we will keep you updated here. Lots more in store today. So much to talk about it. We will never get to it all, but you're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Stick around.
What is this? What's going on?
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
I don't care who knows about what I'm doing. If it's just me and the universe, and that's all that knows about what I'm doing, that's fine with me. But I have this internal, some people call it a conscience, some people call it a moral compass. I have something inside of me that's telling me to show up. And I'm going to do it. And I'm sure that someone out there has a similar voice, or, I'm not saying like, I hear voices. No, not like that.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Just the idea that it doesn't matter who's watching. It doesn't matter who cares. What matters is I know what I'm doing. I know what I believe in. I know what my morals are. I know that I'm standing up for them. And I know that I'm not going to give up. And if that means that everything else goes to in hell in a handbasket, then so be it. At least I know I can sleep at night.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. In the final days of Obamacare's open enrollment period, Fox News aired a deceptive chart suggesting that the Obama administration would fall far short of the initial Obamacare enrollment estimate of 7 million. On All In with Chris Hayes, guest host Steve Kornacki denounced Fox for airing the misleading chart.
And Fox News resorted to making graphics that try to portray 6 million enrollees as actually only about a third of the enrollment goal of 7 million. Check that out.
After receiving widespread criticism calling them out on the chart, Fox co-host Bill Hemmer corrected the chart on Fox's America's Newsroom.
Programming note here: yesterday about this time, you might have seen a graphic on the Obamacare sign-up numbers. Here is what that graphic should have looked like. On the left, it shows the 6 million sign-ups reported for the administration as of March 27, compared to the target number of 7 million plus. That was our mistake. Correction noted.
That wasn't an April Fool's joke. Fox actually corrected the error. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chicago, in the coming months, let's see where we can make progress together. Let's make this a year of sexy liberals. That's what most Americans want.
That's right. Land of Lincoln, home of our president. On April 26th, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is making its triumphant return to Chicago.
Sweet home, Chicago. It should read, tonight only,
Stephanie Miller's
triumphant return.
John Fugelsang, Carlos Alazraqui, and progressive radio and television star Stephanie Miller will perform live at the world-famous Chicago Theater. Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com and at the Chicago Theater box office. Don't miss Stephanie Miller's own twist on Chicago-style politics.
Politics ain't beanbag.
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, live April 26th at the Chicago Theater. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
You're struggling with your mortgage. You think about it. You don't do anything but think about it.
What are we going to do if we lose the house? Where are we going to go?
At work.
I can't let anybody find out. I'm so embarrassed.
At dinner.
How can I tell the kids? It's going to wreck their lives.
And at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get through this. What's going to happen to us?
It's time to stop thinking. It's time to start dialing. Call 1-888-995-HOPE for a free government program that offers expert one-on-one advice about your mortgage options.
I'm all alone.
No, you're not. We've helped over 1 million homeowners, and we want to help you. And now there are more ways to help. Call 1-888-995-HOPE or visit makinghomeaffordable.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Treasury, HUD, and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you wherever you're hanging out with us, and please, when you have a minute, connect with us over on Facebook and Twitter at Talking Left or Facebook.com/Talking Left. We love to see your comments there.
Actually, another cool thing, and I was listening to this in the Green News Report. If you go over to iTunes, we're there, but put some stars on there, because I think the more stars they have, the more it'll pop up as people search.
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah.
If you're listening to the podcast, go
Or
over
not.
and rate
If you're
it.
listening to it live, just go to iTunes.
Yeah.
There should be a hyperlink right on the front page of our website. So.
Help us out. Yes.
Well, actually, you're helping out other people to find the show.
There you go.
You're being a helper.
Yes. Speaking of being a helper, I think there's a certain member of Congress that wants to really help the defense industry.
And welcome. We need to welcome to the radio world.
Yes.
Of course, when he walks into the radio world, he gets 600 affiliates as soon as he walks through the door. Mike Rogers. This kind of went bleep under the radar. Mike Rogers, he's been omnipresent ever since this spying thing and Snowden and all that. He head of the Intelligence Committee in the House. He says, "Nah, I'm not going to run again.
Nope.
Nah. I have all this power, but you know what? I want more power. I'm going to go to radio. I'm going to go to conservative talk radio." Wow. Think about this. Jim DeMint in the Senate.
Yes.
Senior senator, South Carolina. I mean, John C. Calhoun state. I mean, the secessionist of all the secession states. I think I'm going to leave the Senate. I'm going to go run Heritage, where I have more power.
Right. It shows
Mike
where
Rogers, that's where the conservative power base is.
Exactly.
I really believe this, that it's in think tanks and media, specifically talk radio. They just own all the stations and they put on their nonsense. But this is very interesting because he's going over there to talk about national security. We heard this week, just as soon as the Affordable Care Act is like, wow, it's now more popular than unpopular, and 7 million people signed up. And well, those numbers don't mean anything. We're going to talk about national defense in the next election.
Right. And what is that about?
In other words, Rand Paul need not apply.
In other words, we're going to start a radio show to campaign against Hillary Clinton.
That too, because head of the State Department, all of a sudden, Mike Rogers, we don't have enough. We're not talking about enough national defense and national security issues on conservative radio.
Because the defense industry, the military-industrial complex, doesn't have enough power.
Yeah, essentially, sponsored by Boeing and GE.
Right.
That it's a defense contractor saying you keep cutting our budgets, and we can't have someone like a Rand Paul in there, and we definitely don't want a Democrat. And they're probably going to run Hillary or Secretary of State Clinton, former Secretary of State Clinton. So let's put Mike Rogers on there on 600 stations, blast him out to keep the isolationist Republican from getting the nomination, and to keep Secretary Clinton from getting the presidency. It's it's so obvious what's going on.
Yeah, and it shows exactly where the power in that party is. I think to some degree, that's Democrats' disadvantage. Is our power lies with the people, with the voters. Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to corral and herd that gang of cats.
And it's interesting, though, that we're having such a difficult time, on the radio, infiltrating all this consolidation of the ownership. We're certainly not going to get Democrats into those think tanks. We have our think tanks are great. Center for American Progress,
right.
Amazing. Love them. But the Republicans know that the power lies in each and every one of the people in the progressive and democratic movements. So what do? Voting rights laws. They spend $1 gazillion misinforming people, change your textbooks, get rid of education, privatize schools, and then, blast us out in the media. They know that that's the way to do it, to keep people from the polls and keep them dumb.
Yep, and keep them misinformed with talking points from the defense industry.
So all we can do is keep putting out information.
Yeah, and we do our best, and a lot of great shows do the same.
Dang straight.
Anyhow, we have lots more in store. We're going to come back with Heidi Weber, former dean of Globe University and whistleblower who exposed the corruption at that for-profit university. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we'll be back with more, so stick around.
So, who is
who's responsible for these outrages?
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
It seems that Representative Paul Ryan, the Republican Party's highly touted budget guru, doesn't have a very tight grip on the concept of irony. Otherwise, why would he choose April Fool's Day to release the latest version of what the GOP intends to do to federal programs and to the people who count on them if it takes total control of Congress? But there he was on April 1st, declaring with a straight face that we Republicans believe that we owe it to the country to offer an alternative to the status quo. It's just that simple. Sure, it's simple. He just Xeroxes the same stale budgetary flim-flams that he always puts out, even though the public keeps upchucking at the sight of them. Ryan's alternative to the status quo is the status quo ante, taking Americans back to the harsh days before there were any programs to help unemployed, elderly, sick, and other people in need. Ryan turns Medicare into a we don't care privatized program, and he wants to outright pull the plug on the new health care law that extends coverage to millions of people, replacing it with nothing. Hey, it's just that simple. His budget scheme also slashes job training, education, infrastructure repairs, medical research, public broadcasting, the arts, and, well, pretty much anything that regular people need. Still, he claims that he's helping people in an ideological, Republican-y way. For example, Ryan explains that whacking food stamps, quote, empowers recipients to get off the aid rolls and back on the payrolls. What payrolls, you ask? That's not my problem, says the guy drawing $174,000 a year and a gold package of benefits from the government he pretends to despise. This is Jim Hightower saying, yeah, let 'em eat right-wing ideology. I wish it was an April Fool's joke, but Ryan's joke is on us.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Aggregate individual federal campaign contribution limits are gone thanks to Wednesday's U.S. Supreme Court ruling in McClutchin v. Federal Election Commission. The ruling dealt with direct contributions to candidates and campaigns from individuals and will likely increase the flow of money and its power in politics. The High Court ruled that total limits of $48,600 every 2 years by individuals to all federal candidates and campaigns is unconstitutional, violating the First Amendment. Separate aggregate limits on political party committee campaigns were also struck down by the court. Justice Stephen Breyer's dissent said that this decision doesn't uphold, but in fact is a blow to the First Amendment and American democracy. Federal election law, still standing after this ruling, continues to ban direct corporate and union contributions to candidates. The limits struck down apply just to individual contributions. Chicago fast food workers protested McDonald's wage theft Wednesday at the McDonald's All-American game at the United Center. The Workers' Organizing Committee of Chicago is fighting alongside the Fight for 15 campaign in an effort to raise wages for fast food and retail workers in Chicago. 3 class action lawsuits in New York, Michigan, and California have been filed against McDonald's alleging wage theft practices. McDonald's made nearly $5.6 billion in profits in 2013. 3 Toyota plants in Ontario will be voting soon on whether or not to join Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union. The assembly plants in Woodstock and Cambridge, Ontario, would become the first Toyota union shops in North America if the union wins the vote scheduled for next week. Unifor, formed in August of 2013, is a merger of the Canadian Auto Workers Union and the Communications, Energy and Paper Workers Union of Canada. SEIU 32BJ workers rallied in New York City Wednesday as 32,000 apartment building workers pursue a fair labor contract that maintains benefits while providing wage increases. A strike authorization vote was scheduled. The union, representing thousands of doormen, porters, and other New York City building workers, is ready to strike if talks with building owners break down. The current contract expires April 20th. A federal court challenge to Michigan's anti-union so-called right-to-work law will go ahead. The Michigan AFL-CIO will be allowed to make its case that the law violates the federal government's power to regulate private sector labor unions. U.S. District Judge Stephen Murphy ruled, though, that the state does have the power to stop the union security clauses that allow unions to require workers covered by a collective bargaining agreement to either pay union dues or fees to the union. The Michigan AFL-CIO says the significant parts of the case challenging Michigan's right-to-work law are going forward.
Workers Independent News is proud to be heard on The Union Edge, Labor's Talk Radio. Live nationwide weekdays noon to 3 p.m. at theunionedge.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
So when you get to the corner of Smith and Orchard, you're going to want to take a left.
You are not going to.
Then what you're going to do is turn onto Marcy Avenue.
Just broke up
and go past the first 3 lights and then take the next left.
I don't really
then
think
drive 5
she's
more
happy,
blocks
but
and you should be
who
there.
am I to judge, right?
Park on the
Anyway,
right.
That's
I'll
what
see you
I heard
later
last
tonight.
night.
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
And welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. You may remember that late last year we spoke with Kyle McCarthy, the co-founder of Student Debt Crisis, and he talked to us about this amazing Globe University story, profiteering off the backs of students and taxpayers. He recently came out with an update on that and about the trial of whistleblower Heidi Weber, the dean of Globe University. Heidi, you are here today. Thank you so much to give us some updates of what's going on and how everything is turning out.
Well, thank you so much for having me. A lot has happened since the trial last fall. Of course, Globe University is fighting the verdict. There was a unanimous jury verdict in my favor for reporting this in the school. For the trial, the jury was unanimous in my favor. Since then, in February, Globe, of course, filed for a whole new trial, citing that literally the jury was wrong, the judge was wrong, I was wrong. That was basically their rationale. It was quite interesting to listen to that argument. But the judge came back with a ruling in February stating that their appeals were denied. And in addition, he explained why the trial should be upheld, so forth, and granted $500,000 to my attorney for his attorney's fee. So that was a great thing. Anyway, Globe has hired a former Supreme Court judge to handle their appeal. That motion I don't think has been filed yet, but I gather they are going to go forward with that.
Wow, what former justice did they hire?
I believe his name is Eric Magnuson. He used to be a former Minnesota Supreme Court justice. And so essentially he's kind of, he was the boss of these appeal judges for a while there. So I feel like, you can all make your own opinion of how I feel about that. But, I'm strong. I have faith in our judicial system. I have faith in the judges. Everything, they've done everything the right way, and justice has been served so far. So I'm pretty confident.
And just to remind everybody, the whole reason for this was that Globe University was profiting off the backs of students, selling them, in my own words, I'll say pretty much worthless degrees and lending out money at very high interest rates. I mean, just lots of really deceptive, disgusting practices here. You were the good person, stood up on behalf of the students and blew the whistle on this university. And it sounds to me like they are using the legal system as a weapon against you for doing so. Is that at all a fair summary?
Well, every listener can make up their own opinion based on the information that we're giving here. But, I was a little taken aback that they would go, to that step. But, when you, they have a lot riding on this verdict. I mean, their reputation, I can't imagine this press is doing them any favors, yet they continue, moving forward as if they've done nothing wrong. So, yeah, I would say, in your opinion, I feel the same way. I was a little disheartened that they would go as far as to hire a former Supreme Court judge. But there again, I have faith in just the judges. I mean, they're going to see this. They're going to understand. They're going to see the same things that you and I and everyone listening to this is going to see. I really feel that way. And Globe University is a for-profit college, along with all the other for-profit colleges, and they're coming under a huge amount of fire right now. If you followed anything in the news, it's been tons of regulatory crackdowns on them from all kinds of, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, Department of Education. So Globe is one of these schools that's trying to fight to keep their head above water. And so this verdict is pretty damning for them in the long run.
Now, since your original story, when you originally broke this information and, Kyle's reporting, which I believe started back late last year, has there been any specific investigations into these practices at Globe University, into specifically the predatory student lending, 18% interest rates? Have any government agencies, state or federal agencies looked into this and maybe tried to get to the bottom of it? Or is this all a civil matter based on your whistleblower trial?
Well, of course I'm not, I don't know all of the information, but I do know that Lori Swanson, who is the current Attorney General of Minnesota, is great. I mean, she is really wonderful. She really watches out for consumers, I think, in Minnesota. I live right on the Wisconsin border, but the Globe University network is based out of Minnesota. And I know she's currently investigating them as we speak. Now, there's also a student class action suit that arose after my trial, and I'm so very proud of them. They took my trial as a springboard, and oh my gosh, 100 students came forward and said, yeah, I was deceived by this school, and now there's class action pending. So I would say that probably the Attorney General is kind of still investigating, gathering evidence, and you don't want to upset the student case either. So I can't speak to that, but definitely if you go on the Globe University website, they have to by law post their statistics, and I would tell any student to look at this at any college. But I think in 2012, they're one of their campus, their main one in St. Paul, had a 22% graduation rate and then 78% placement. So placement, you have to be able to graduate before you can get placed, right? So only 22%, 22 out of 100 students graduated from that school that took out federal financial aid, and 96% of them take out federal taxpayer financial aid. And then only 78% of that 22% got a job anywhere. So you're looking at 17 to 18 students out of 100. It makes me sick. If you look at the statistics, and it's wrong. It's a waste of money. Horrible.
Absolutely. I just want to quickly remind everybody, we're speaking with Heidi Weber, a whistleblower and former dean of Globe University. I just want to kind of shift to the bigger picture here, because Globe University is not the only for-profit school that may operate in a similar fashion. Now, certainly there's probably some for-profit schools out there that do things by the book. But how can a student, if they're looking at a potential college or maybe even already attending one, how can they try and protect themselves against predatory practices like Globe University has done?
Well, definitely, I would advise students, as a teacher first, and as a teacher, you want to watch out for your students, but I would advise any student that's looking to go to college to really ask about statistics, ask about placement rate and graduation rates. A lot of the for-profit schools will say, 96% of our students get jobs or whatever, but they don't tell you what the graduation rate is. And you need to know that statistic. You also need to know the return on your investment. So if a school is very expensive and you're looking at getting a, $13 an hour job, you need to do that investigation before you enroll, because obviously, if you have $80,000 in debt, which is an average debt load at Globe or Minnesota School of Business for a bachelor degree, and you're only pulling in $15 an hour, that's where the problem lies. And these people are not able to pay their debt back. And truly, that's why you're going to college, so you can have a better life.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. I mean, we did a whole show a few weeks ago about the just disgusting nature of student loans and how they follow people around. It can only be worse for those taking out $80,000. And in the meantime, universities like this are getting hundreds of millions of dollars in student aid. Heidi, I think that, people like you are the reason that this system comes to light and the problems being exposed here. And I think, you're starting a movement that will hopefully stop this practice and put some transparency in these for-profit universities. What's your takeaway from this whole situation? Are you still happy that you went to these efforts and went through this trial?
Somebody asked me not too long ago if I would do it again. And that answer isn't as easy as you think it would be. It was easily the most horrible thing I've ever been through in my life. And then to feel alone. My family's in South Dakota, so I essentially went through this entire trial alone because I couldn't talk about it or anything, other than my husband and my daughter. So, I would do it again because in the long run, this needs to be changed, and somebody needs to take a stand and push back. And it's not only a for-profit thing, it's an employment thing, too, that you can't let people fire you for reporting, fraud or deceptive practices. So it's not only a for-profit, it's an employment thing of saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm a great employee, I'm doing my job, this is wrong, and this needs to be changed.
Well, Heidi, you are not alone. We are with you, and I know that everybody listening is as well. Thank you for putting yourself through this to expose this and protect the students at Globe and at for-profit universities everywhere. That is it's such an important public service, and it's an honor to speak with you.
Wow. Geez, you gave me a big head. Thank you so much.
Heidi Weber, everybody, former dean of Globe University. You can follow her on Twitter and let her know that you also stand with her. Her Twitter handle is #1 Heidi W. 1 Heidi W. Please give her a shout out and let her know you stand with her. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and we'll be back with more, so stick around.
A beautiful place full of wonderful things just waiting to be experienced.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. Right-wing media have rushed to blame restrictions on the ability of soldiers to carry sidearms on military bases for the mass shooting at Fort Hood on April 2nd. But military veterans and base commanders, including Fort Hood's own commanding officer, have said that calls to expand access to firearms on bases are flawed. On MSNBC's Janting and Company, military analyst and retired Colonel Jack Jacobs added his voice to those critics.
The situation that existed at Fort Hood the other day, in a circumstance in which everybody has weapons, could very easily result, and probably would have resulted, in an enormous mass fratricide, and you would have this all the time. Arming everybody in a civilian situation like at Fort Hood would result in a terrible, terrible tragedy larger than this one.
Jacobs, a recipient of the Medal of Honor, explained that it boils down to military commanders weighing the risks and rewards of arming soldiers on bases.
No responsible commander would ever agree to arm all of his soldiers on post. That's all there is to it. And I know I've commanded lots of troops in and out of combat.
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
I keep going back to this sports analogy, and I know that a lot of people aren't into the sports thing, and I get that. But, if you got a team going up against another team, let's call them Team Democrats and Team Republicans, and let's say they play the same game over and over and over again for years and years and years and years and years and years and years, and they keep running the same play over and over again. Like the Democrats keep running the same play, the same exact play over and over again. Eventually, the other team's going to figure out, wait a minute, they're going to run that same play again, so we'll anticipate that, prepare for that, and make sure that doesn't happen.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
And so trying to solve today's problems with yesterday's Everybody's solutions causes more problems.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
Dear Republicans, this coming election year, progressives everywhere want to thank you from the bottom of our bleeding hearts for being you. Go! From your war on women, thanks. Off half the country. Oops. To the government shutdown. Absolutely brilliant.
You must be stupid.
We'd send flowers to each and every clown and carnival barker in your broken, dysfunctional party, but instead, we're throwing a party. On Saturday, May 10th, the world-famous Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico for some good old midterm mocking. Stephanie Miller and her sexy liberal players will perform live on stage at Popejoy Hall. Tickets are available online at UNMtickets.com. Don't miss the sexy liberal Schadenfreude.
What the hell is that?
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, May 10th at Popejoy Hall in Albuquerque. Go to UNMtickets.com.
Hey, America. We need to have a little talk. We've got more food in our country than we know what to do with. Food at the grocery store and food in the vending machines, fast food, health food, and seafood. We've got so much food that anything people don't buy, we just throw out. Yet 17 million kids in America struggle with hunger. That ain't right. Luckily, the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks has volunteers gathering excess food and getting it to hungry kids. They're kind of like food angels. Yeah, I made that up. It's kind of catchy. Hello, people. This isn't rocket science. We could solve hunger today. To start, become a food angel yourself by supporting Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org. That's a website. Duh. We can't do it without your help. Brought to you by America and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Big thanks to Heidi Weber, former dean of Globe University and whistleblower. Again, follow her on Twitter at @OneHeidiW. Give her a shout out. Let her know that you support her for going through a lot of hell to expose some really disgusting corruption at one of these for-profit universities.
And if one of them's doing it, chances are some other ones might be.
Right. In fact, back in July of 2012, after a 2-year investigation, the Senate Help Committee released a scathing report on the for-profit college industry.
I just love it. We're going to give you a scathing report.
Yes.
Oh, why don't you enact some laws, darn it?
Exactly.
I'm going to scold you vigorously.
That investigation turned up that these schools charge a much higher tuition rate, have lower graduation rates. Students end up with way more debt, and often way more students end up in default. But that is only a small piece of what Globe University is doing. There's another great article that was posted by Kyle McCarthy of studentdebtcrisis.org. The title of it is Globe University Owner Sell, Sell, Sell. You should go and check it out to get all the details. But basically, because of Heidi's case, and because of discovery and the fact that that case, once it was over, became public record, Kyle was able to get his hands on some interesting information from Globe University, including the Globe Education Network's Admission Representative Training Manual, the training manual for admission reps. And what he found...
So on there, it has minimum SAT scores and the essays and, all of the things you had to do, during, high school, extracurricular. That's what they look at?
No.
Oh.
No. In fact, this was more like a selling manual, and it required admission staff to memorize a 60 to 75-minute presentation to overcome any objections a student may have and get them enrolled. This was all about getting as many students as possible, getting them as much financial aid and student loans as possible. Oh, yeah, by the way, including the 18% interest private loans offered by Globe University's own lender. But this manual shows how corporate greed has corrupted everything down to our education system. The information in this manual is so stunning that I can't help but think that all for-profit universities are probably practicing similar tactics. There's probably a few exceptions, but this guy, Terry Meyer, who owns Globe University, back in 2012 at a Globe University's admissions fall kickoff event, essentially, which was a gathering of about 200 admissions reps.
200?
Yes.
That's a lot of admissions reps.
Yes. He grabbed the microphone and yelled to the audience, "Sell, sell, sell." Yet he continues to claim that the sole reason his school exists is to educate, graduate, and help students we serve improve their careers. Interesting. As Heidi just mentioned.
He said it reminded you of The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes, for anybody who hasn't seen that movie. Think about that statement, sell, 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 when you go watch that movie. This manual taught representatives a quote-unquote questioning technique, essentially a sales tactic to overcome any possible disagreement a student may have. Instead of trying the hard close and getting them to sign on the dotted line, tried questions called trial closes, asking for an opinion, so then they could essentially predict what the student might object to and overcome it. The manual actually states, quote, "The most successful representative is a psychologist first, a salesperson second." Wait a second. This is a college. Where in that list is helping students, have a more successful career, helping them with their education? It gets even worse. This manual states verbatim, "You are a problem solver. You are there to help them overcome their problem. One problem is that they need specialized training. You are there to help them. If you do not think they have a problem, uncover one and help them solve it. One point to remember, there are no arguments against education." It's clearly showing that the whole purpose of this university is to get as much money from government aid and students as possible, and has nothing to do with providing anybody a decent education.
They're selling education loans.
Yes.
That's, you see a lot of the car dealerships, they're kind of on the corner. They're essentially car loan, companies that happen to have cars on the lot.
Exactly.
This is an education loan selling company that happens to also have, some teachers.
Yes.
Perhaps.
This university is so bad. 18 students from the Minnesota School of Business, which is one of their offshoots, alleged that school made false, misleading, and confusing statements about their sports medicine program. Another former dean of Globe University back in 2012, Jean St. Clair, filed a claim alleging that she too had been fired after blowing the whistle on the university. And in 2013, current and former students have filed a class action lawsuit alleging false advertising, deceptive trade practices, and consumer fraud. So my question is, where is the government investigation? Why is Globe University allowed to continue operating?
Right.
And if they're doing it, why aren't we making sure that other for-profit universities are not? It shows that there should not be a profit motive in education.
Right.
Because this is what happens. When you have corporate greed influencing and, affecting something as vital as education. Thank you.
Actually motivating it, because that statement he said, no one has an argument against education. But they're not selling, like I said, they're not selling education. It's a Trojan horse. Here's your education, but inside is the army of debt. And the thing is that, we shouldn't. There's one easy way, just kind of like we had, the division between investment banking and regular banking. We can put a division in between providing an education, providing educational loans.
Yes.
That might kind of fix this real quick.
I think so too. And maybe some usury laws when it comes to education loans. I'm sorry, 18% interest on an education loan?
Yeah.
18%?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Right.
So anyhow, you can read more about that over at studentdebtcrisis.org, Kyle McCarthy's site, and along with his other articles and some more information about Heidi's case. Lots more coming up, including some more stories on disgusting corporate activities. We're going to get to those.
I can't wait.
Yes.
I didn't know what they're about. That'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we'll be back with more, so stick around.
This is not normal.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Terrestrial radio, they don't want us Soyuz around no more, so...
They hit us, so we hit them back.
SoFloRadio.com.
It's Thursday, April 3, 2014.
Good evening. The world has never been spoken to quite this way. We've never been warned like this before, all of us, about climate change.
Blunt UN climate report warns the window of opportunity to act on climate change is closing.
Major funding for NOVA is provided by the David H. Koch Fund for Science.
The billionaire Koch brothers are environmental freedom fighters, say the Koch brothers. Texas breaks wind records, that is. Plus,
a much more optimistic study put out by my favorite environmental group, ExxonMobil.
ExxonMobil agrees the risk of climate change is clear, but says, "F you, world, we're ExxonMobil."
All of those yous and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The global warming whiners at the UN have just released a report that I predict will raise the urine levels in your pants.
We'll see. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I know we got a lot to get to today, but before we do, I just want to give a shout out and a welcome to our newest affiliate partners, The Rick Smith Show. We're happy to have them on board. You can check them out at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks, Rick. Glad to have the Green News Report on your airwaves.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
What do you have for us today?
Well, on Monday, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its latest report detailing the impacts of climate change, not just in coming decades, but impacts that are already hitting across all sectors of human society right now, from water to energy to our food supply, from agriculture and the oceans.
We see impacts from the equators to the poles and from the coast to the mountains. There's no question that we live in a world that's already altered by climate change.
That was the lead author of the new report, Dr. Chris Field. Now, the head of the IPCC, Dr. Rajendra Pachauri, warns that unless we swiftly ramp down our greenhouse gas emissions, we risk pushing the climate beyond our ability to adapt as a species.
Nobody on this planet is going to be untouched by the impacts of climate change. If the world doesn't do anything about mitigating the emissions of greenhouse gases, then the very social stability of human systems could be at stake.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah, that's all. However, the IPCC report does offer some hope. While some serious impacts are already baked in and unavoidable, the window of opportunity has not yet closed to cut our emissions. And this is about risk management. We can still take the exit ramp by cutting fossil fuel emissions, and we can avoid the worst impacts.
Kudos to Brian Williams and the NBC Nightly News for giving this report, frankly, the coverage that it deserved right at the top of the network newscast. Contrast that, frankly, to the rest of cable news, and we got almost nothing on this startling new report.
Now, I did see good coverage on MSNBC, but CNN pretty much ignored it almost entirely.
And Fox News?
Nothing.
Nothing. Well, certainly they ridiculed it, yeah.
But here's the kicker. ExxonMobil is banking that we will fail. On the same day as the IPCC's sobering climate impact report, ExxonMobil released a report to shareholders acknowledging, quote, the need to adopt policies to address climate change, but concluding that, quote, governments are highly unlikely to adopt policies that cut emissions. And of course, Exxon will continue to use its oil profits to hire lobbyists who will influence politicians to ensure there's no climate legislation. In other words, Exxon says, yeah, we're going to overheat the planet, and you can't stop us.
As Stephen Colbert described this phenomenon of ExxonMobil taking its profits from dirty energy and taking this green cash to give to Congress to allow them to emit even more pollution.
It's a phenomenon called the greenhouse effect. also the Green Senate effect.
Yeah, there you go.
Meanwhile, it sounds like an April Fool's Day prank, but it's not. Charles Koch of the infamous billionaire Koch brothers published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this week asserting that he and his billionaire brother and their many polluting companies are excellent stewards of the environment, and he's spending his fossil fuel millions to deny climate change because he's really fighting for freedom.
Yes, we know he cares about science because if you watch Nova on PBS, it says Nova is sponsored by the David Koch Science Foundation, described this way.
The David H. Koch Fund for Science, supporting Nova and promoting public understanding of science.
Ah, yes. When I think of the Koch brothers, I think of supporting public understanding of science.
Finally, on March 27th of this year, the state of Texas generated nearly 1/3 of its electricity from harnessing the wind. 100% clean energy, and the fuel is free.
In the state of Texas?
Yep, they're the leader in wind energy.
The people who are busy voting for politicians who are against wind energy and solar energy. Oh, don't get me started. For much more on that, check our website instead at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to the Green News Report, at least until the David Koch Foundation for Science starts kicking in. Find us and follow us on the Facebook or the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Deep in the heart.
Broadcasting live from Washington, D.C., this is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you wherever you are hanging out with us, SoFlo Radio, hanging out in the chat room, or listening over on We Act, where you can hear Jacob Dean and Filter Free Radio and Skeptical Scott
a mere hour from now
coming up next. So make sure to stick around for that. Before the break, we were talking about Globe University and corporate greed. And another big story in that department this week was the story about the GM recall. For anybody who may have been under a news rock this week, GM's new CEO, Mary Barra, was testifying before Congress about the ignition problems that caused deaths because the car completely was uncontrollable, and people died because of this.
So this was a part where the keychain was too heavy, it just turned off the car.
Right.
Which meant you lost electricity.
Which meant you lost power steering, power brakes, etc.
If you're going 60 miles an hour, have you ever lost, you've probably driven cars, I remember the cars that didn't have power steering and how difficult they are if you don't have momentum and all kinds of things. The car acts completely differently, get in accidents, you die.
Right. Since February, because of this problem, GM has now recalled 2.6 million cars. That's a lot because this problem stems back at least to the year 2000. During that testimony before Congress, we found out that the unacceptable cost to GM of this part to have replaced it so that it didn't kill people was a whole 57 cents.
57 cents.
Now, that's just the cost of the replacement switch that would have fixed the problem. But, there was a bigger cost to GM, to be fair, that if they had undertaken this recall when they knew about it, we'll say 2007, 7 years after they actually knew about the problem, it would have cost them about $100 million to fix the problem. It'll be substantially higher now.
Okay.
So a lot of people this week, including ourselves, asked the question, were there some executives in a room somewhere that sat around and said, replacing this part is $100 million, but paying out liability claims maybe is only $50 million, so it is more economical to just leave the broken part.
Right.
And it's an interesting question.
Right.
Did somebody actually sit around and make that decision? And
was it even in that stark of terms?
Right.
Did they really say, okay, these wrongful death lawsuits where we will calculate that X number of people have died as a result of this, and those families suing us, those lawsuits will cost X amount, replacing will cost 3X. Is there really a person that sat there and weighed the cost of a life versus the cost of corporate profits? And I would think probably not.
I would have to agree with you. And I think that statement, that note, is essentially one of the main things wrong with the whole corporate personhood argument. One of the best cases to prove that corporations are not, have not, will not ever be people.
And even if they are made up of people, corporations have a way of depersonalizing everything.
Right.
Because they are legal artifices. So there isn't a person that ever faces that question. It's a far more diffuse and removed question.
Exactly.
Where you have, somebody, 3 divisions away, an adjuster saying, crunching numbers, and you get a final report that may be 100 pages, and then you read the summary, and then you say, okay, well, this is really easy. We're going to spend $100 million, or we're going to spend $50 million. We'll spend $50 million. Adjourned. Let's go have some martinis.
Right. Think about how this, we don't have the evidence, so this is some degree of speculation, but think about how this probably went down. The engineers, the people in the safety departments knew about this problem as far back as 2001.
Right.
They knew about this.
Right.
So you figure they probably said, sent this issue up the ladder. Hey, guys, this is a problem. It could kill people.
Right.
Then that gets turned over to, like you said,
and then
an adjuster.
An adjuster who says, okay, well, we could replace all these, or we could write a note to all the dealerships saying, make sure that people don't use heavy keychains. That's really inexpensive. Hey, done. No big deal.
Right.
Right. And the thing is that as they get bigger and bigger, and this, we were talking about this in the first hour with Walmart. If you have to look someone in the eye and say you're only getting $7.25, it's a lot harder than from 17 states away.
Right.
It's a lot easier to make that decision when the information that's been funneled up, every time it gets funneled up the chain of letter, it gets watered down.
It gets sterilized.
Right. So no one ever actually makes that decision saying this is what a life is worth.
Right. That's the thing. That is how, that is the argument against corporate personhood. An individual person, a human being, could not sit there, as you said, and look someone in the eye and say, your family member's life is not worth us recalling
We've seen this with contamination of water where people get cancer, et cetera. But personhood also limits liability.
Right.
So that when you make that $100 million decision versus a $50 million decision, and there might be a life involved, if there's no threat whatsoever of ever going into a jail cell for the rest of your life, you're not going to even consider those types of things.
Well, I don't
If there was a corporate death penalty, I will tell you that the calculus would be different.
Yes, because there would be bigger risk involved. When everything is broken down to only be numbers on a page, where there is no actual human element involved in these decisions. Like we think back 50 years ago to why CEOs who made 40 times their workers, and they actually typically were involved in the business, and they knew these people, they knew what their kids' names were, they knew their families. There was a human element there, and that's why decisions were made with that human element involved. There were stakeholders in corporations as opposed to just stockholders.
Right.
And you have a situation like this with GM, and everything that is human. The human cost of a decision like this is completely removed from the people making the decision.
And the corporate structure was designed that way.
Right.
The very inception of a corporation was to take people out of the process. You can't commingle your assets. You can't commingle funds. You can't have a machine that's both yours personally, and is to separate the two and to make one of them is a person, one of them is not. Period. And the legal artifice perpetuates this risk analysis where you don't deal with people on an honest basis. We were talking last segment too about, the two parts of the Citizens United. This one, I completely agree that the corporate personhood is nonsense.
Right. I think we wouldn't have situations like this if corporations actually were people. If they actually had human compassion, human concern.
Right.
We wouldn't have somebody saying that a 57-cent part isn't worth somebody's life.
Yeah. There was something kind of major that happened in between, then and now. And
that's an interesting point.
I was watching a little bit of the Fox News, and they're whining. It's amazing. Oh, well, the United States government bailed them out, and you can't sue them. See what happened when GM declared bankruptcy. Any potential lawsuit against GM for these defective parts is considered a liability, and those liabilities were in bankruptcy court. They were gotten rid of. That's part of bankruptcy. So, you have the conservative, well, it was the U.S. taxpayer that gave this money, and it's terrible. These people can't, sue. Well, yeah, it is terrible, and it happens every single day. You guys call it tort reform and bankruptcy reform. You guys enacted this stuff.
Right.
GM just took advantage of the laws that you completely love, except the government's involved this time.
Exactly.
Except so we can blame it on Obama again, blah, 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 blah. And also, the release of this and then changing the CEO, it just seems really convenient. You have a new CEO, doesn't know anything, and we went through the bankruptcy, which got rid of the liability, and then we told you about it afterwards. And if we had told you about during, would that have messed up the bailout? And, there's more going on here.
Right. And as I'm the first person that wants to save American manufacturing, I am happy that GM paid back the loans and survived, but not at the expense of people's lives.
Right.
And I have to say, we just paid off a car.
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, in a couple of years, we'll probably have to, you knock on wood every time I say that, we'll probably have to get a new car.
It's nice not having a car payment.
It is nice not having a car payment. But how can this type of information not influence our decision?
And that's the interesting thing when they did that risk assessment, the 100 versus the 50. Is it predicated on the information never getting out or getting out widely? So therefore, what is your loss of business? What's going to do to potential buyers? I mean, it just seems so short-sighted. Also,
right. And it begs the question of, what do you do in a situation like this? Do you throw somebody in jail because you know damn well that it's not going to be the CEO, it's not going to be an executive, it's going to be some low-level employee.
But also the corporations, especially the big ones, are set up in such a way that no one has enough knowledge to pin a criminal act on them.
Plausible deniability.
Right. If like I said, if it's passed up enough times and watered down enough times, no one person has all the information, and that's one of the real downsides of having such mega corporations.
Right. So what do you do?
I don't know. This is a tough one.
I certainly wouldn't want to see a huge American car maker that employs, probably thousands, if not a million or so American workers. I wouldn't want to see them taken out of business. However, I am all about the corporate death penalty, and I have no issue with if there were executives that knew this information and did make it despite knowing the human cost, I have no problem with those people going to jail.
In order to get that information, though, you have to have lawsuits. And so I think at the root of some of the problem are the bankruptcy laws.
Yeah.
And a lot of the tort reform that's going on. Because that analysis, that cost-benefit analysis would change quite a bit if you could have, people coming in and saying, I'm going to sue the heck out of you.
Yeah. And
the thing is that's kind of more of a libertarian argument in that the damage has already been done, but that potential damage may change some decision making. That's the best I can do at this point, because when it comes right down to it, people make bad decisions. Sometimes they make, purposely bad decisions. Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of, one, deterring that. Lawsuits can deter that. Potential, criminal liability can deter that. But that's pretty much it.
See, I think
it doesn't always work.
I don't know how we do it, but I think we need to force corporations to return to the days of stakeholders, not stockholders, because I think they need to factor in just community relations, what effect their decision has on actual people.
Right.
Especially if you want to
profits.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obvious, but how
do we do it?
Right. That's not how.
The only way I can think is
changing some of the tax incentives in terms of corporate profits.
Yes, and being more responsible with our buying choices.
Right.
Not necessarily. I'm not in favor of boycotts.
No.
Because I don't want to hurt the people working for an organization.
Right.
But I will choose to spend my money with a company that treats their workers well, that is responsible to their community, before I will spend my money somewhere else.
Right. Like going to Zingerman's, like the president.
There you go. Or Bus Boys and Poets.
How cool was that?
I know. You were very excited.
I was very excited. We talked about that a lot.
Yes.
And to look up and scroll, he said Zingerman's. How about that? That was awesome.
It was.
We're going to go there soon.
Yes, we will. So lots more in store.
It's getting to be close to lunchtime.
Lots more in store. We still have to touch on Hobby Lobby. We haven't talked about that yet today.
That's what happens
so
when we take
much
a week off.
To cover. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and we will try to get to the rest of our news before we end this show. So stick around.
Yeah, sorry about that. The show's gotten a little lowbrow.
What are you talking about? It's like the most hilarious show ever.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. On Fox News' The O'Reilly Factor, host Bill O'Reilly brought on House Budget Chairman Paul Ryan to absolve him of remarks he made criticizing the work ethic of inner-city men that many felt had racial undertones, including Representative Barbara Lee. However, O'Reilly only made the situation worse.
They don't want to solve the problem. These race hustlers make a big living, and they get voted into office by portraying their constituents as victims. And it's all your fault, and it's my fault. It's the rich people's fault. It's the Republicans' fault. It's everybody's fault except what's going on. And what's going on, as you know, is a dissolution of the family, and you don't have proper supervision of children, and they grow up with no skills, and they can't read and speak, and they have tattoos on their neck, and they can't compete in a marketplace. And that's what's going on.
Congresswoman Lee gave a rebuttal on MSNBC's All In.
Race hustler, welfare queen, food stamp president, these code words are to be expected from the right wing. However, they should not be accepted.
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio. Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean. With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
A sense of responsibility. I think that's one of the big things that separates the innocent child from the adult that knows better, is the sense of responsibility. And I know that none of us really like to take on more responsibility, because most of us, we don't like to do anything. We like to sit on our ass and not be responsible for anything.
I don't like responsibility.
Exactly. But here's the problem. The people that are most responsible for beginning and really carrying through this revolution, the New Year's revolution, is you and me.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
The ones who have more of a grasp of what's actually happening. And I hate to, give you some homework or more responsibilities, but I think more of the weight of the responsibility is on those of us who know better.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
You heard that right, Minnesota. Michelle Bachmann is leaving Congress. And to celebrate, it's out with the crazy.
Bye-bye.
And in with the sexy. Backed by overwhelming popular demand, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Minneapolis June 7th at the State Theater. Comedic geniuses John Fugelsang and Carlos Alazraqui will perform live on stage with the star of all progressive media, Stephanie Miller.
Are they pro-America or anti-America?
Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com. Don't miss this evening of political comedy with a special goodbye to Michelle and Marcus, too.
Clang, clang, clang goes the trolley!
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, live June 7th at the State Theater in Minneapolis. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm one out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry.
There's enough food in this country to feed everybody.
Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. We are just a few moments away from speaking with Dave Saldana, the producer and director of Keystone Pipelines Exposed. He's got some new lies to expose that you'll definitely want to hear about. But before the break, we were talking about corporate personhood, specifically GM. And of course, the big corporate personhood story this week.
Actually, it was a week before.
For, what was it?
Yeah.
Wow, we missed a show. See what happens?
Yeah.
But it has been ongoing for several months, is the Hobby Lobby case.
Yeah, March 25th is when it was argued.
Where does the time go?
I know.
Anyhow, Mother Jones broke a big story this week.
Yeah.
About Hobby Lobby's hypocrisy.
Yeah, well, Hobby Lobby is claiming that it has a religion. The corporation Hobby Lobby has a religion, and we're not only do we have a religion, but it's evangelical, and we're going to impose it on our employees, and therefore no birth control.
Right.
So,
however,
yeah, no, and remember, and let's point this out. During the oral arguments, it was Justice Sotomayor that pointed out, oh, and by the way, Hobby Lobby, your sincerely held religious and deeply held religious convictions, your health insurance up until about a year ago covered all this birth control. You just changed it in order to attack the Affordable Care Act. Just FYI.
Right. Which to me sounds like they were approached by attorneys who said, hey, we want to use your religious liberty as an excuse to attack the Affordable Care Act.
Chick-fil-A probably just doesn't, it wasn't available.
Yeah. They weren't religious-y enough.
Oh, I have no idea.
So, anyhow, the story Mother Jones broke was that during this whole time, before and after they started filing lawsuits with the Department of Labor, back in 2012, the company invested a whole $73 million in investment funds that include companies that actually produce the very contraceptive pills, inter-unit.
Well, actually, even further, I think one of the companies produces RU486.
Yes.
Which is not one of the birth control methods at issue here. You do realize that there's 10 birth control methods that are covered by the Affordable Care Act. RU486, the science proves that it prevents a conceived, egg from implanting, and therefore the argument is made that that's abortifacient. That for that reason, it was not even included in the things that must be covered. So this is further, the four contraception methods that Hobby Lobby is complaining about actually are real. They prevent conception.
They're Plan B, Ella, and copper and hormonal intrauterine devices. And researchers reject the notion that these are abortifacient. They say that these pills just prevent implantation of a fertilized egg. So.
No, they prevent conception.
Oh,
period.
We have the wrong word in our Mother Jones article.
Yeah.
But essentially, they work by delaying ovulation or making it harder for conception. Conception
itself. And the thing is then therefore it's not abortifacient.
Right.
But then the Supreme Court went on, a number of what they believe it is. That's their religious belief.
But
science be damned.
I think it's very telling that, for instance, Plan B and Ella, two of the very drugs that Hobby Lobby objects to, are made by Teva Pharmaceutical Industries.
Which
they've invested in. And it's not like they don't have an alternative. They can invest in retirement funds that completely take out these type of drugs, these type of companies. But
now, the question is, did they affirmatively make a decision to invest in these companies? Or is it more like the GM thing where it kind of got passed up the ladder?
Or that they didn't know. I mean, it is possible that they didn't know.
It's far more likely. So on the other side of it, you don't even know what you're investing in, much less a 57-cent part.
Right.
Think about this. And they're actually a smaller company, so I don't think it actually works as, they're closely held. So,
I think if they were...
what they should have.
I think if they are severely, strongly held religious beliefs, so much so that they think they should have a right to deny employees with
healthcare,
with legal, necessary healthcare, that they should be checking their investments.
And the interesting thing is this came out afterwards, so it wasn't part of the record, so it couldn't be. And it really gets to this core of, do we want, every time this comes up then, if the Supreme Court says, yes, Hobby Lobby, you closely held corporations, I think if they do say yes, it'll be to closely held corporations, not publicly traded huge mega corporations. How do you decide what the religion of Boeing is?
Right.
So you closely held corporations, you can have your religion. And when a closely held corporation comes in and says, well, our religious belief believes in the solid work ethic from a very young age, so we're going to employ 6-year-olds.
Right.
Then a court has to actually sit there and say, is this a closely held or deeply held religious conviction? No, let me finish this. Do we want courts measuring people's religious convictions? Because that's what they would have to do. And that's what the court has rejected and not wanted to have done for a very, very long time, specifically Justice Scalia. Justice Kagan threw these words in Scalia's face. The courts are not equipped to measure people's religion. And that's what the result would be. Courts would have to measure people's religion. Not even people's, corporations even. Right. How do you do that?
I mean, what
a mess.
I don't know what the religion is off the top of my head, and I'm sure either you or the chat room will point it out, but these people who believe that all medical treatment is wrong and that we should just pray over everybody.
Right.
You know?
Sure. All these were brought up, people who don't believe in blood transfusions,
right.
et cetera.
But
there's going to be some out there things too.
Yeah.
There's going to be people that are going to push the limits on this. There will be corporations, closely held corporations, that are going to push the limits. And then what do we really want judges, evaluating people's religion? I think that's just, I don't like it.
I don't like it either.
I don't think courts want it.
We'll have to talk about that when we get a decision, and hopefully there's some moment of sanity.
I don't know.
In the crazy justices on the Supreme Court. We have lots more in store. Dave Saldana, producer.
Pray that they have some sanity.
Producer and director of Keystone Pipelines Exposed. Coming up next, you can check that out at pipelinesexposed.org. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we'll be back with more, so stick around.
I'm David Schuster, and you're listening to my favorite show other than my own, Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
The dictionary defines a caterpillar as a, quote, worm-like larva and a crawler. Also, that pillar part of the word is derived from a French verb that means to pillage, abuse, mistreat. Now, meet Caterpillar Inc., the world's largest maker of construction and mining machines. A recent report by the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations found that this worm-like behemoth has crawled through a tax loophole to abuse our public trust. Caterpillar has quietly shifted some $8 billion in profits gained from selling parts on the global market into a Swiss subsidiary in order to avoid paying more than $2 billion in taxes owed to our country. Even though this subsidiary has only 65 employees and neither makes nor sells spare parts, Caterpillar made a slick accounting maneuver that channeled 85% of its international parts profits into what amounts to a tax shelter. Corporate officials tried to bluster their way through a subcommittee hearing, insisting that their offshoring of profits was merely meant to streamline the corporate flowchart. It was prudent, said Caterpillar's top financial officer, to eliminate the unnecessary middleman between the profits made on global sales and the paying of taxes on those profits. That's absolutely absurd, says Senator Carl Levin, the subcommittee chairman. He pointed out that the middleman she was referring to is Caterpillar itself. It designed, made, and sold the products, and the only reason it wormed its profits into a Swiss subsidiary was to cheat on the tax bill it legitimately owes in its home country. This is Jim Hightower saying, when you hear right-wingers say that America doesn't have the money for infrastructure repairs, poverty programs, etc., remember that U.S. corporate giants like Caterpillar have hidden some $2 trillion of their profits in slimy offshore wormholes.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out. HightowerLowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Reuben Jones is one of the millions of American workers who make minimum wage. He was nearly overcome with emotion at a press conference in Washington, D.C. Thursday as the Give America a Raise bus tour ended its 11-state journey pushing for an increase in the minimum wage.
For 5 years, I never got a raise. I never had a chance to go out. I got 2 children and 4 grandchildren. I can't even visit them. I can't visit them at all. I don't have the money to do it. I work every day hard. Excuse me. One day, I was coming home from work from Largo. It was raining. Train stopped running at 11:30. I get to the subway at 11 o'clock, thinking that the train was still running. I get to the train station, the train is gone. Don't have no money to get home from Largo, from D.C. to D.C., so I had to walk. And then turned around, I had to go back to work the next day, tired. I do everything in that job that I possibly can. For me to work like this, to be treated like this, it's a shame. Thank you. Please, the people that hear me now, today, please raise the minimum wage. We all need it. We all need it. Please. Thank you.
Most jobs in America, roughly 81 million, pay less than $20 an hour, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. At least 18 million of those jobs pay less than the $10.10 an hour that Democrats, labor, and progressive organizations say should be the nation's absolute minimum wage. AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Shuler.
Working people are on the move. Working people are on the move. And it's women and men, and whether they're union or non-union, they're coming together and they're saying the same thing, that people are working hard, but they're not able to make ends meet. Wages have been stagnant despite productivity going up and despite soaring corporate profits. And that is not fair. So a higher minimum wage, as well as reform to allow more collective bargaining, right, is critical. People get it. They live it. And they want Congress to do something about it. They want Congress to act, and act now. It really cuts to the core of the struggle of millions of workers around this country, and that's why the labor movement is mobilizing. Labor movement is mobilizing in cities and towns across the country with coalition partners, because it has been too long since America has stood together to raise wages and claim that American dream again.
The Dream Action Coalition says it's escalating activities calling for immigration reform and an end to deportations. Erica Andiola, co-director of the Dream Action Coalition, says families of those deported and in detention will make themselves heard at the White House.
That's what we're here to say to the president. We are going to stay outside of your house. We're going to stay outside of your door, your window, until you stop the deportation of our families.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Here at the GED Pep Talk Center, we've got a pep talk that can motivate you.
Sometimes things don't always turn out the way you want them to.
You can improve your future. Now get your game face on and take the first step towards a better life. Hurry up! Don't make me repeat myself.
Whatever level of motivation you need, we've got a pep talk for you. Call 1-877-38-YOUR-GED or visit yourged.org for your pep talk and for free classes in your area. GED is a registered education brought to you by Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. By now, you have probably heard lots about this great new documentary, Keystone Pipelines Exposed, produced and directed by Dave Saldana. He has been everywhere in the media. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. And I think it's amazing that since you've produced and promoted this documentary, it seems like the lies just keep coming out.
They really do, and I'm glad to be here, Danielle. Thanks for having me here.
So tell us about this latest discovery and this so-called veterans group, Vets for Energy.
Well, about a week ago, I've been following the story continually, even since the documentary's come out. And there was a press conference on Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago, and it was hyped up that veterans support Keystone Pipeline. And I thought, well, I know a lot of veterans, and some of them support the pipeline, I imagine, and some of them I'm certain don't. Hilton Kelly, who's one of the featured speakers in the documentary, is a veteran, and I know for certain that he doesn't support the pipeline. So who are these people claiming to speak for veterans everywhere? And it took very little digging to find out that Vets for Energy is actually a front group of the American Petroleum Institute.
Yeah. It's an amazing connection there. You have two great articles I want to point people to over at pipelinesexposed.org, where they can also check out the documentary. AstroTurf is a petroleum product, and Front Group is as Front Group does. Tell us a little bit about what you found out.
Well, what I found out is that API created a front group called America's Energy Forum, and that front group is the direct link to Vets for Energy. Their websites are the same style. They have the same legalese in their terms of terms of use. So it seems like they've got a very cozy relationship. But if you look closely, Vets for Energy only recognizes that it's sponsored by America's Energy Forum, and America's Energy Forum actually acknowledges that it's sponsored by API. So you see that there's this deliberate attempt to, or seemingly deliberate attempt to distance themselves, Vets for Energy, from API. Now, one of the spokespeople for Vets for Energy, or he's called an advisor in quotation marks, is a retired Rear Admiral Don Loren, who was also, in addition to being a flag officer in the Navy, went on to become a deputy director of Homeland Security. He's been the person put most at the forefront of Vets for Energy. Now, he was questioned by a reporter for the Omaha World Herald at this press conference, and was asked, "Where do you get your money?" And he acknowledged that they get some funding from API. Now, that's what really offended me. Looking into this, it's to say that, well, we get some funding from API, but he said we're an independent voice for veterans. Well, that's just nonsense. That's misleading. That's deception, because they are a wholly owned subsidiary of API. It's important to note that they're not a 501c3 nonprofit organization, as many legitimate vet organizations are. So they don't have to file any public tax forms. So we can't really know what's happening behind the scenes. And that, I suspect, is deliberate also. But what I did find is that if you do a little bit of deep diving in the API's website, you find a press release from July of 2013 where API calls Vets for Energy a campaign. At American Petroleum Institute's Vets for Energy campaign, which spells out very clearly that this is no grassroots organization. It's what we call an AstroTurf organization. It's fake grassroots. And funnily enough, AstroTurf is made out of petroleum. So it was a nice little play on words, but it's also very accurate. This is no grassroots organization. This is a fake organization put together by Big Oil.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me with all the deception that is already surrounding Keystone XL to just find another layer here. In a recent interview, this guy, Loren, said, quote, "We like to say that we represent 23 million American veterans." I find that phrase really deceitful because of the qualifier, the "we like to say." Well, you can like to say a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean that it's true. Is that a fair opinion?
Sure, absolutely. That's fair. You know, weasel words like that are sort of the stock and trade of the big deceivers. You know, Big Oil, big tobacco. You know, they've made a living out of these weasel words, like I don't believe that tobacco causes cancer, right? You can believe all you want. We know what it actually does. Now, what's interesting is that was speaking to a U.S. newspaper. Admiral Loren also spoke to the Sun News Network, which is called Fox News North here in Canada. It's very similar to Fox News. It's a right-wing organ that was created by, or is run by, a former aide to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who I like to say is very much like George W. Bush, but not as stupid or as mean. but every bit as right-wing, every bit as pro-corporate, pro-oil. He cut his teeth he's cut his political teeth in the oil fields of Alberta. But speaking to Sun News Network, Admiral Loren said, in no uncertain terms, and you may want to run this clip for your viewers to know that I'm not making this up. He said, "We speak for 23.4 million veterans and their families in most cases."
isn't it dishonest? Well, quickly, I want to remind everybody, we're speaking with Dave Saldana, the producer and director of Keystone Pipelines Exposed. You can check out that documentary, if you haven't already, at pipelinesexposed.org. Isn't it disingenuous when anyone comes out and claims to speak for millions of members for any group? Like, I wouldn't want, as a woman, somebody coming in and saying, I speak for all American women. I imagine that union members wouldn't want someone coming out and saying, I speak for all workers. Isn't it the same, if not even worse, to claim to speak for all of those who have served in our military?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the second blog post that I wrote, Front Group is as Front Group does, was a response to some criticism that I received about that the first blog post, saying, well, is it fair to call them a front group? They've disclosed that they have a relationship. Well, actually, they've tried very, very carefully to hide it, right? Having that one press release is very similar to the weasel words. Well, we disclosed it. No, you didn't. You have to dig very deep to find that press release that acknowledges the relationship between API and Vets for Energy. The other criticism that I received was, well, isn't it likely that they speak for veterans? Well, it's true that according to recent polls, a majority of Americans support Keystone XL. But as it happens, the more they learn about Keystone XL, the less likely they are to support it. But that's sort of entirely besides the point. Sure, it's highly likely that a good supply of veterans support Keystone XL. What is not okay is for an organization bought and paid for by Big Oil doing the bidding of a foreign corporation, that's TransCanada, that wants to take American farmland, ranch land, to put up a pipeline and say, we're doing this because veterans love us. That's horse dung.
Yes.
And it's offensive. It's deeply offensive to people who have served. I mean, to say that on a very volatile, highly contentious political question, we speak for 23.4 million veterans and their families is truly offensive.
Yeah, it's essentially using our military men and women as pawns in the Big Oil scheme to steal American property and pollute this country to export oil to another country. It's really disgusting, in my opinion. Just in the bigger picture here, and kind of getting back to all of the amazing things you expose in your documentary, if we know this now about Vets for Energy and API and this completely AstroTurf organization, why should anybody believe the nonsense in these pro-Keystone commercials that are flooding our airwaves, that unions and veterans and blah, blah, blah support Keystone XL? Why should we believe any of it?
Well, the fact of the matter is we shouldn't. As we've spoken before, I'm a lawyer. And one of the things that you learn in practicing law and in law school is that if a witness lies about one thing, everything else they say is suspect. Right? And if you and your viewers take a look at Keystone Pipelines Exposed, the short film, you'll see lie after lie after lie. You know, you can go to pipelinesexposed.org, and we've got fact sheets that this is what Big Oil is saying. These are the facts. This is what Big Oil is saying is good for energy security. No, it's not. They're saying it's going to create jobs. No, it won't. Everything that they say, including of and the, is false. So why should we believe anything they say? And in this particular instance, if they are willing to take the respect that Americans have, and rightfully so, for people who have served in uniform, many of whom saw the horrors of combat and have come back home and are trying to live their lives, for Big Oil to usurp that honor and that reverence that Americans have for veterans, to sell this foreign company's pipeline running through American land, is just shameful. Why should we trust anything they say?
Exactly. I mean, this is as low as it can get. And from your documentary and from what I imagine we will keep finding out, I have a feeling they'll just keep getting lower. Dave, thank you so much for exposing this. Americans do love our vets, and it is something we hold sacred. And for these AstroTurf organizations to steal that respect is really shameful. Thank you for exposing it. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I would just urge your listeners to keep on this issue, because we've seen in the last week or so that big oil is really trotting out every dog and pony they can to try to get this passed. But we know that it's actually to the detriment of our national interests, not in our national interests, so we have to keep fighting.
Absolutely, and we have to keep spreading these lies as we find them. Dave Saldana, producer and director of Keystone Pipelines Exposed. The website is pipelinesexposed.org. Check it out, share it, and expose this Petroleum Institute for what it is. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we'll be back with more, so stick around.
Everyone expected just a piece of fluff, but we wanted to do something important. You know, issue stuff.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. In the wake of another tragic shooting at Fort Hood, conservative pundits were quick to blame gun regulations and Democrats for not allowing soldiers to carry guns on military bases. On Fox and Friends, co-host Steve Doocy made this claim.
Now, keep in mind, it was back, I believe it was during the Bill Clinton administration, where they decided that men and women on base shouldn't be able to carry arms, even though they're trained professionals.
As the New Republic explained, it was a 1992 DoD directive issued under former President George H.W. Bush that established the rules limiting firearms on military bases. Bill Clinton didn't take office until January 1993. On Fox's America's News HQ, retired four-star General Jack Keane pushed back on that idea and explains why, in practice, arming servicemen and women on bases is not a good idea.
Can you imagine the first responders coming on a scene and there's people shooting all over the place and they have to determine who is friend and who is foe? The soldiers, they do know how to defend themselves, but they're not policemen. They are not trained to control a violent situation and de-escalate it.
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Hey friends, Jacob Dean here with exciting news. You can now hear my show, Filter Free Radio, on the free Stitcher mobile app. Just download the free Stitcher app from Stitcher.com or in the App Store and search for Filter Free Radio. That's all there is to it. No syncing, no taking up memory on your device. Just Filter Free Radio on demand for you on the go. Plus, you can rate and review Filter Free Radio on Stitcher. The more you rate, review, and share us, the higher we will rank on Stitcher, and that means the more people will discover Filter Free Radio. It's never been easier to enjoy Filter Free Radio and help us spread the word. So download the free Stitcher app, search for Filter Free Radio, and start benefiting from unfiltered radical truth-telling anytime, anywhere. Thanks, and keep up the good fight.
Chicago, in the coming months, let's see where we can make progress together. Let's make this a year of sexy liberals. That's what most Americans want.
That's right. Land of Lincoln, home of our president. On April 26th, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is making its triumphant return to Chicago.
It should read, tonight only,
Stephanie Miller's
triumphant return.
John Fugelsang, Carlos Alazraqui, and progressive radio and television star Stephanie Miller will perform live at the world-famous Chicago Theater. Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com and at the Chicago Theater box office. Don't miss Stephanie Miller's own twist on Chicago-style politics.
Politics ain't beanbag.
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, live April 26th at the Chicago Theater. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
When I grow up, I want to be a new pair of blue jeans. When I grow up, I want to be a kid's first computer. When I grow up, I want to be a glass countertop in a new home. When I grow up, I want to be a kid's best birthday present. When I grow up, I want to be a football stadium. When I grow up, I want to be a warm fleece on a cold day. When I grow up, I want to be a fancy backsplash. I want to be a bike that races around the country. When I grow up, I want to be a bench on a forest trail. I want to be a rocking chair on a sunny porch. I want to be a skyscraper. I want to be When I grow up, I don't want to be a piece of garbage. And if you recycle me, I won't be.
Give your garbage another life. Recycle. Learn how at iwanttoberecycled.org. A public service advertisement brought to you by Keep America Beautiful and the Ad Council.
listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Big thanks to Dave Saldana, producer and director of Keystone Pipelies Exposed. Again, that website is pipeliesexposed.org, and there's a great documentary over there, a short film. Watch it, learn it, share it, that exposes the nonsense of Keystone XL. Really, really great stuff. So we like to do a funny story at the end of the show, if we can, when we find one. And I have to say, I picked this story solely so I could read the title of it.
Okay, what's the title of it?
Cokie Roberts picked a fight with Alan Grayson on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Guess who won? Yes. For anybody listening to this show, you can probably guess
who we picked.
It was Alan Grayson.
Yes.
Yes, Cokie Roberts and her husband Steve wrote an op-ed calling Alan Grayson a liberal ideologue for his opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
There's nothing ideological nor specifically liberal about that.
No. In fact, a wide majority of Congress actually opposes fast-track authority. So I don't think that's very ideologue-y.
I like that. New word.
Yeah, new word. Yes. There's a great note. This is posted over at Naked Capitalism by Ives Smith. Okay. He says, memo to Cokie. You are supposed to be enough of an insider to know which targets to pick. Grayson happens to be smart, well-versed in policy issues. Yes, a shocker for Congress critters. Pugnacious and not cowed by personal attacks.
Right.
That would be a good summary of Grayson, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But Cokie went after him anyway, essentially saying he was wrong for opposing the Trans-Pacific Partnership because she's all about free trade. You know, she's saying that this would be good for our country. And
what evidence does she cite? Because we've done this a few times, and all the evidence points to the fact that it's a really bad deal.
Well, she just says the general disclaimer that free trade has improved the U.S. economy. And
in what measurable way?
Exactly.
Nonsense.
Well, Grayson decided to respond to her.
I'm glad.
Yes, in a post entitled "Cokie Roberts is an info hack."
Okay.
Yes, and in his blog, are you disgusted by this crooked and underhanded attack by Cokie Roberts? Do you oppose free trade giveaways? He went on to say, by attacking me, Cokie Roberts unintentionally has provided a fascinating case study in how Washington, D.C. really works. Her attack on me was really an attack on the American middle class. Her attack on me was an attack on you. Love, Alan Grayson.
Yeah.
Yes. He explains she ignores the fact that the United States has been importing nearly $3 trillion in goods and services each year, exporting only $2 trillion. And he says, note to Cokie, 3 is more than 2.
It'll be a trade deficit.
She touts the fact, he puts in quotation marks, she touts the fact that trade supposedly supports almost 10 million jobs in the United States, while she ignores the fact that imports cost us even more jobs.
Right.
In fact, we've lost 5 million manufacturing jobs to free trade over the past decade.
And as these jobs, what we're finding now is that the jobs were exported. Now they're being imported again. Whereas they used to pay $35, $40 an hour, now they're being imported back. They've been cleaned up and repackaged at $15.
Exactly.
$12, $15 an hour. So essentially they've figured out a multi-year way of cutting people's pay more than in half.
Yes. And he points out that Cokie may have an ulterior motive for supporting the Trans-Pacific.
Did he point out what that might be?
Yes, that the TPP is backed by lobbyists. He writes, lobbyists like Cokie Roberts' brother, for instance.
Oh.
Yes. Yes. Love Alan Grayson. You can go and check out his...
It's unfortunate that, it's fine to... I think that Cokie Roberts, if she believes that, or if she wants to support the TPP, write something on the TPP. Don't go after Alan Grayson personally.
Well, and if you do...
And if you do, he's going to come back at you personally.
Yeah, you better be prepared for the reaction.
He's going to come back at you personally. I have an interesting theory. We've got this... We haven't talked about this plane that went down, disappeared, poof. And I know that they love it. It's getting huge ratings, and CNN is talking about space aliens. Okay, whatever. Well, we have a lot of countries out there looking for this black box. And, are we going to find it in Ping Pang and where, whatever? Somebody's going to find it probably.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next question? Who's going to get to listen to it?
Yes.
Who's going to get to listen to it? We have some countries in this. Actually, a lot of them are involved in the TPP of all things. But, Malaysia doesn't get along with China, and China's out there. And Australia finds it cool. But, the United States, we have the best equipment. When it should come to us, we are the best, being the arrogant selves that we are.
Mm-hmm.
It should come to us. But you only have 3 people on the plane. Wouldn't it be funny if who gets this black box blows up the TPP?
Oh, one could only hope.
Weird?
One could only hope.
Think about how 2 stories could collide very strangely.
Yes. Who knows?
I know it's a weird cockamamie, idea, but I don't know.
Hey, if it happens to be true, you heard it here first. And if not, we never said it at all. You didn't hear anything.
And I'm going back to erase the podcast.
Yes.
Okay.
Want to give big thanks to our great guests today. Heidi Weber, whistleblower at Globe University. Dave Saldana, producer director of Keystone Pipelines Exposed. And of course, our friend, teacher, educator, historian, Mr. Kopolakis. And big thanks to We Act Radio, everybody over there, Alex Lawson, Kimon Freeman, Pete Callahan, Cliff Schechter. Of course, George Rodriguez of SoFlo Radio, Rocky Mountain Mike, Boca Brittany, Nicole Sandler, just because we love her. And we want to remind you to stay tuned to We Act Radio for the DC premiere of Filter Free Radio. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you guys next week.